Today is July 15th. Now it is past 3 p.m. in India and it's past 10:30 a.m. in England. It's time for the webinar. On behalf of the organizer, Department of Physics, Prabhu Jagatbandhu College, Kolkata, I wish a good morning to our honorable speaker, Dr. Amit K. Chattopadhyay, and participants from England. And a very good afternoon to our honorable principal, Dr. Subroto Kumar Rai, my institutional colleagues, and teacher participants who registered with us from various schools, colleges, universities, and research institutes of not only our state, but also from many other states of our country. And last but not the least, good afternoon, my dear student participants. I feel proud to address such an assembly. At present, we are in the midst of a pandemic, surrounded by life-threatening terror and uncertainties of many kinds. I check Worldometer often. It says, till date, more than 134 lakhs of people across the world have been infected by COVID-19, and nearly 5.8 lakhs have died. In most recent past, 10 years ago, the swine flu pandemic killed little more than 2,700 of people in India, while the number of confirmed deaths this time so far in India is nearly 10 times of that. And we all know here in India, worst is yet to come. The biggest factor behind so many affected people is our lack of knowledge about the virus itself and thus how to treat it. No drug has been proven to be effective totally till now, though we have hopes that a commercial vaccine will be ready soon. Doctors and researchers all over the world are working hard. We who are not in the frontline research are very much eager to know what is going on, what are the directions followed by them. Today, we assembled here to listen from one of such researchers, Dr. Chattopadhyay, about a particular possibility of the solution, which is herd immunity. Via vaccination, it contributed to the eradication of smallpox in 1977. So it may work now also. Another possible solution is containment. That is why we are presently under lockdown. We all muse how effective the lockdown is. Today, it will be clear. We will understand about the impact of lockdown as a function of lockdown imposition and withdrawal dates. So let's be attentive, be receptive, and enjoy the webinar. Now I invite Dr. Kishore Mukhopadhyay as the anchor for this webinar henceforth. Over to Dr. Mukhopadhyay.
Thank you, Dr. Dolon Champa Saha. And welcome to the international webinar on mathematical modeling of COVID-19, propagation kinetics, herd immunity to containment. I welcome you all. Now, I request our respected principal, Dr. Subroto Kumar Rai, for his welcome address. Please, sir, please start your welcome address.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Now? Okay.
Audible.
So, today we have assembled here to participate in the webinar organized by the Department of Physics, Prabhu Jagatbandhu College, West Bengal, India. The topic or the theme of this webinar is mathematical modeling of COVID-19, propagation kinetics, herd immunity to containment. So I think we are very lucky and very much interested also to listen from the main speaker and of course the guest of honor, Dr. Amit Kumar Chattopadhyay. He is presently at Aston University, Birmingham, UK. The topic is very much relevant today because of the fact that not only India but also the whole world actually now under threat due to the pandemic COVID-19. So we think that immediate solution of this problem is a necessary one, that is not only for the developed nations but also for the underdeveloped or developing countries also. This pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, is a shock to the society. It is very difficult for us to absorb this shock without the proper medicine to be applied for the cure of the disease. To protect the COVID-19, for the eradication of this pandemic, I think the country like India is in very tensed, or you may say in very crisis situation, because of the fact that the lack of awareness of the people. Though we see that not only the developing or the underdeveloped countries, but also the developed countries like America, USA, there we also see the shock is very, very high. I mean, the death is very high for this country like the USA. So today we are actually waiting to hear the lecture by Dr. Amit Kumar Chattopadhyay. We are waiting for that. So I will not tell more. Just after this short introduction, I welcome Dr. Chattopadhyay on behalf of our institution, Prabhu Jagatbandhu College. I welcome all the colleagues, means not only the professors of our college, but also the participants and the professors, researchers, students from other colleges and the universities and the research institutions and schools, okay, etc. All the participants, for all the participants, again I am in the stage of welcoming them. So I welcome all. Again, please sincerely participate in this webinar. Thank you all. Welcome again.
Sir, for your valuable comments and encouraging words. Now, I request our convener, Professor Pramita Howley, to introduce our speaker. Professor Howley, please.
Thank you, Dr. Kishore Mukhopadhyay. Good afternoon to all. I feel privileged that I will introduce our guest of honor and speaker, Dr. Amit Chattopadhyay, to you all. Dr. Chattopadhyay is a theoretical physicist specializing in multidisciplinary applications of physics and computational mathematics in physics, quantitative biology, material science, and mathematical finance. His research novelty lies in unifying four diverse research areas: quantitative biology, mathematical finance, soft matter physics, and material science, analyzed using mathematical and data modeling. Dr. Chattopadhyay has published more than 70 papers in various leading international journals. Also, he is an editorial board member of the Nature and Frontiers group journals, amongst others. Actually, Dr. Chattopadhyay is from our city. He did his PhD on statistical and field theoretic turbulence modeling from the Indian Association of the Cultivation of Science, Jadavpur, in 2001. He had his first postdoc at the Max Planck Institute for the Physics of Complex Systems in Dresden, Germany. A second one as a Humboldt Fellow at Hans-Meitner Institute in Berlin. He worked as a research associate at the University of Warwick, UK. He was the first Indian maritime at the University of Padua, Italy. He joined his first academic position at the University of Edinburgh in physics that he left to return back to India, where he joined the University of Delhi Department of Physics and Astrophysics. At present, Dr. Amit Chattopadhyay is a reader in mathematics at Aston University, Birmingham, England, UK. He is a senior fellow of Higher Education Academy of Aston University and a fellow of the Institute of Mathematics and Application, UK. Today, he has joined us from Birmingham. We are really honored by your presence, Dr. Chattopadhyay. So now it's time to begin our academic session. May I request Dr. Chattopadhyay for his presentation. Over to Dr. Chattopadhyay.
Okay, right. I should start by sharing the screen now. Could you please confirm if I am being audible, also the screen is visible? So just keep an eye on the chat box. If any of you could just inform, because there had been a glitch, and it's partly usually my fault, not anybody else's. So I just wanted to make sure if we start the presentation that it's being audible and it is okay, fine.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes,
Thank
please.
you. Okay. So I will start with, which I didn't want to and I didn't hope to, certainly, with a strong word of apology. This is related to the fact that Kishore, who has been the backbone of this particular description, the particular setup, he wanted to set everything by himself, and I believe that I would be able to supervent and try and do an even quote-unquote better job, which exactly turned the other way around. So the
You're able
YouTube
to
link
see,
that was set up, we set it up a couple of days ago, and
Amit,
there
could you
was-
please raise your voice slightly?
Sure. Let me see. Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Better?
Yes. So you can see.
Is it better? Is it better? Can you hear me now?
We can hear you, but not properly. Can you
Okay, let me just
make
take
it
this-
more better?
Let me just take the mic off and see if that makes things
Yeah.
better.
Okay, okay.
Is this better now?
Yes, it's better now.
Okay, perfect. It's even better for me. Thank you, Kishore. So I was just about to say, I mean, it's really the word of apology to start with. You have all been delayed, and it's my fault. It was set up 2 days ago, and not just Kishore, it was help from Dolandi and Pramit, I believe. So the fault related to the crash or the sort of discord that I was having between certain screen reader, OBS, and its costing through YouTube. So there was a discord, so I had to reset it, and in the process, the link broke. So what I have tried to do meanwhile, it's the last thing, the last sort of thought that could be done in this particular circumstance. So I literally shared the link through LinkedIn and some of the WhatsApp friend list and emails, whatever I could do. He should have probably had done the same. And it's really, again, it's very disappointing for me, for Kishore, who put so much of time and effort in this, and basically to disappoint him. I'm really sorry about this. Shouldn't have happened. And instead of a potential 500 audience, we are just now restricted to the number that we have on the Google Meet. And yeah. So there's not much that I could say, or neither could I do at this particular point in time. I certainly would be particularly careful in the future. Let's now come back to the topic of the talk. Now, we have a raging problem at the moment. The problem, as we all know, and this is nothing that I really have to start out and say something scary about. It is scary, and we are all aware of that. So it's COVID-19. So the name 19, as we all know, starts from the year that it was first detected. Is a very strong word and a dodgy word here. It was first recorded, probably would be the best thing to put it. 2019 December, it was detected, well, certain regions in China, they actually detected a spurious virus that was raging like a wildfire and was not being controlled. So initially, as probably within the limits of decency, I would have to point out to certain chaotic and conflicting information supply from WHO, the World Health Organization. So initially, WHO declined that as a pandemic, and later it was declared as one of the worst forms of pandemics. Not just this, there had been many other discords and statements from WHO that we all have been familiar with by now. So that is an issue, and not something that is of bother for me, but the issue is we have an ongoing serious problem. Some of the countries are sort of now over the board. Some of the countries are coping well and are past their peak. Some countries, certainly India, for example, is not past its peak, and the statistics, as we can show, and I hopefully will be able to convince you from the predictive modeling that we have been doing in this particular regard, is quite scary. So we will come to that. Just a bit about my own background. So my name you have heard. I am in Aston University. This is in the Midlands area in the UK. So Midlands has quite a few vaunted universities in the UK context, and Aston is one of them. I am in the mathematics department, and SARI that you see in front, it stands for Systems Analytics Research Institute. It is a multidisciplinary research institute which combines different research heads. So I am a mathematician. There are certain mathematicians there, some physicists, some computer scientists, some people from biology, some people from optometry. So in real spirit, it is a multidisciplinary department. So what do? We sort of brainstorm and try and collaborate and collate information and basically exchange information between ourselves to try and paraphrase the best possible way to attack a general scientific problem Now, most of these are interdisciplinary problems, so a single person cannot really deal with that. So if it is a biological problem like the one that I'm talking about today, I'm not a biologist, so I cannot go into the biological details, and for that we need a biologist to come up with the biological details, or for that purpose, a medic to give us details about the medical propensities of the problem. If it is related to vaccination, if it is related to therapeutics, we would need people to tell us, the proper medics and the proper medical scientists to tell us and give details about those. An oxymoron to start with, and for this part, I know that I'm talking to a predominantly physics and mathematics audience, but probably there would be a few who are from neither end, so mostly for them. It's an oxymoron to start with, mathematical modeling and then herd immunity, which is a biological context, because we grew up with the idea that mathematics and biology, they don't sit side by side, they don't really see eye to eye. And what I'm trying to do here is a happy marriage in between the two. So basically the point here is this: the biological details which are replete with information on the phenomenological aspects, and some of them could transmute themselves into some numbers, statistical numbers. How can we make sense of those numbers that are read out of the biology of whatever we are talking about, and try to paraphrase that within a logical contour? So mathematics is that logical contour. And modeling, it can mean many different things. For our purpose, we would be exclusively focusing on what we call predictive probabilistic modeling. So probabilistic modeling effectively implies that I'm trying to look at the past, and from that information, I will try to read the future. That's exactly what we will try to do here. Now, a bit of an epilogue here. So what sort of modeling, and I will take the example of something that we are all familiar with from a very non-mathematical perspective. So when we are jabbing on our mobile phones these days, so if I'm typing a text or if I'm writing an email, we get Google prompts. So the Google sort of reads my mind and preempts what is the phrase, what is the description that I would probably be putting in. Or for that purpose, it sort of thought reads my intentions in buying and selling stuff, and it comes up with very colorful and very often the right choice. How does it happen? So some sort of a preemptive predictive mechanism is lying at the heart of this. What we have done here is to hijack one of those amongst many different options, and we have implemented it. So we have sort of joked it together with the fairness of mathematics, and out comes certain predictive layers, some predictive numbers that will tell us how possibly to read the prognosis and the diagnostics of the COVID-19 situation that we are in at. Down and counting. So you have already heard from the curtain raiser that voltometer, and this is the number that I have actually read out of the voltometer. So roughly today, up to today, we are about 12.8 million infected. We is the world we, so it encompasses the entire world. About 565,000 dead. Now, if you divide them by the numbers, so it's a bit more than 500,000 divided by 13 million, roughly speaking. So that's a very, very high mortality to infection ratio. Please note this particular part of the description that I'm saying here. When I say mortality to infection, this is a very important description that we need to focus, and I will come back to this again and again. Let's but have a certain look at a few of the countries. Some of them have coped well, some haven't, and some are trying to. The United States of America, I stands for the number of infected, D stands for the number of dead, N.
Your presentation is off.
You mean from Google Meet?
Yes, yes.
Oops. Since when did this happen? Just now? Can you see it now?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, right. I'm just trying to quickly check what are the other things that might actually have stopped again. So just to quickly check, Kishore, did you hear me until about 10-15 seconds ago, or was it off for a while?
Yeah, it's okay now.
Okay.
হ্যাঁ
So very quickly to go back, so it's down
ফার্স্ট
and
ফ্লোরে এটা আমাদেরই বাড়ি কিন্তু ফার্স্ট ফ্লোরে এটাকে করতে হবে
Please
Install
mute your
করতে হবে।
microphone.
ইনস্টল করতে হবে ফার্স্ট
Please
ফ্লোরে
mute your microphone.
so it's the United States of America. I stands for 3.3
Okay, please proceed.
infected. D is
আর আরেকটা লিখে নাও বিটুইন পার্ক সার্কাস এন্ড মল্লিক বাজার
and dead.
Amit, please
পার্ক
proceed.
সার্কাস এন্ড মল্লিক
Yeah, okay.
বাজার
So MR stands for mortality ratio.
তুমি এখনো তৈরি করোনি তাহলে কালকে পাবো তো
If you
পাবো না
divide D by the number of can I request the audience to
তুমি
use the
পরশু দিনই
microphone?
দেবে তুমি কালকে দেবে না দেখছি ঠিক আছে দেখি
Can all the participants please mute your mics?
ঠিক আছে হ্যাঁ তাহলে তো আমি তো
Mics?
হ্যাঁ।
Lipika
Amit, please
Artho,
proceed.
Lipika
Parak,
Artho,
your
please.
microphone is muted. Amit,
Lipika Artho, please mute your mic.
My microphone is muted.
কোথায়
No. Okay. So everything's fine, Vishaka? Can you hear me now again?
Lipika Arjo, please mute your mic. Can you please mute your mic? Lipika Arjo,
Okay, so I will get started again.
thank you.
So
Okay,
it's
okay.
I'm first looking at the American statistics, a country that is suffering a lot at the moment. Hello. No. Oh,
We can see your presentation, Amit.
you can see or you cannot.
We can see.
But can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Down and counting. In the right-hand side, down and counting. In the left-hand side, mathematical modeling of COVID-19. But
No,
please,
that's fine. But can you hear me? Can you hear me?
yes, we can hear you. Please
Okay.
proceed.
Okay. Okay. So if at any point in time the audio stops, please just let me know. Please, because I am just looking at the full screen, so I wouldn't be able
Yes.
to look at the Google
Yes. And
screen.
can you
Just let me
please
know.
full screen? Can you please full screen mode? Can you please go to the full screen mode?
I am in the full screen mode now. Is it not in the full screen?
No, we can see in the left hand side the PPT thing, all the slides, and then in right hand side only one slide.
Okay. Let me.
Now we can see you, not your presentation.
No, you should be able to see now. Is it the full screen now?
Full screen, but we are seeing you, not your presentation.
You see, not the presentation.
Now we can see your presentation. Slide. If you can go to the slideshow, I think. Kishore, please.
Is this better now? Can you see me?
See
Can
you.
you see the full screen now?
Yes, now it's perfect. Amit, perfect.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Amit, please.
Okay, so sorry for the many interruptions and the many breakdowns in between. Apologies. So we're down and counting, infected 12.8 million overall, all across the world. The number of dead is 565,000, and that's the worldometer reading. More or less accurate, probably not exactly so, but we get the picture. The picture is grim. The American statistics, so I have randomly chosen a few countries, some of which are extremely serious in their conditions, some are coping well, some have already coped, gone beyond the peak point, and some are not yet at the peak point. The American statistics, so what I have done here is, for all these different countries, as you can see, America, then Brazil, where the issue is still raging, all I have done for MR, which stands for mortality ratio, I have basically divided the number of dead by the number of infected, because that is a very key number. The absolute values of the number of infected and the number of dead, they do not matter. What matters is how many people are dying out of infection, which also can be reverted to the information, how many people are effectively recovering from the infection. So that is very, very important. Now that number, and there is another aspect that I will shortly come to, the mortality ratio for the US is 4.15%. That for Brazil is 3.94, Russia 1.66, the United Kingdom, it's a deep red, 15.57, a very, very high number. So a lot of people who got infected actually died. Italy, 14.4%. Now, Italy, as we know, is basically in the cured mode, barring a possible second relapse. But basically, again, the number of people who got killed is very high, and you guys already overshot the Italy. Now, Hubei, more or less one of the central epicenters where everything got started, actually it got tamed at quite a low number, if the reports are to be believed, 6.6%. And now we come to India. Now, apparently, that might give us the impression that this is very good, because India is actually a lot lower than all the other countries that have shown here, apart from Russia, 2.77%. It is not just good, it can potentially be very good if we are roughly restricted to that number. That is something that is unfortunately not probably happening in the immediate future, as I will show you later. But before we move out from this slide, please do have a look at the other descriptor that I have referenced, area. Now, if you divide the mortality ratio in percentage by the area, what you get is effectively how many people in percentage are dying out of infection in every square kilometer. Now, that is a very important descriptor as well. Why? Because we have heard so many different claims and counterclaims regarding tropical countries in the initial stage were declared safe. Countries with low population densities were declared safe. For example, countries in the Scandinavian countries, Sweden, in fact, and I will come back to that again later, Sweden did not impose a lockdown at all because they assumed that the antibody would automatically develop and tame the disease. Unfortunately, this did not really happen that way. But more importantly, there are other issues that we see here, that this disease has not really spared any particular country. So whether hot or cold, tropical, subtropical, or even Scandinavian, or countries with sparse and heavy population densities, they all have been affected in varying proportions. Because, and this is something that actually accounts for what we call the herd immunity, and this is something that I will emphasize very soon. Herd immunity is like a balancing act. So while having a heavy population density can be negative, it can simultaneously be a positive if we are talking in the context of herd immunity. We will see that very soon. Now the outline, and I'm not entirely sure how much of that I would be able to cover because of the time lost. Part one, I will try to bring in herd immunity from a mathematical context. But before that, I will actually explain in very non-mathematical parallel what is herd immunity to start with. Because we have been hearing this word very often. Herd means a flock. Immunity is, for example, vaccination or something that protects your body from external pathogens. And there, in that particular context, I will bring in the mathematical part. Please note, this is the mathematical part, the model part, which does not yet involve any form of predictive modeling through artificial intelligence or otherwise. So this is conventional mathematical modeling, but that would give us the idea of what is it in the form of herd immunity that we want to see develop, and we want, or rather we hope and expect that it happens for our case in the different countries that we are at. The second part would be the predictive modeling part using artificial intelligence, that's AI, statistical modeling. And I will start with a biological outer layer. COVID-19, why is it dangerous? I will have a very brief foray into the biological description. So biology for a physicist, as you can guess. How does it look like? How does it propagate? Most of this information we have heard either for and against. I will try to put a logical paraphrasing around some of the things that we have heard and how much of that can logically make sense. Not everything, but some. Then we will go on to the mathematical model. Prediction. How India is faring as against the rest of the world. I've just shown you in the previous slide some tidbits, examples of that, but then we will come across the real numbers. Infection propagation, shall we worry? And the mortality ratio. The mortality to infection, our prediction versus real data. And I will show you real numbers, not just plots. And those real numbers would actually foray into the future. We will see all of that. Now, part 3 is the mathematics of vaccine and drug preparation. Now that again might sound very much like an oxymoron, that mathematics and drug preparation are not exactly the same thing. I will go into this if I get the time, but the fact is I might not, and in that case we will preserve part 3 for the discussion section. I'm very happy to talk into the details. In fact, that is the talk that I very recently gave to literally higher secondary in the UK parlance, the A-level students. So all I did there was we actually discussed how the mathematics of vaccination, how mathematics can actually lead to paraphrasing or description of a vaccination, how it actually leads on to drugs. One of the raging words that you probably have heard is this, the last word, drug repurposing. So what does it mean and how does mathematics or physics for that purpose come into fray? Part 1, on to herd immunity. Now before we do that, let's clarify with some degree of understanding the 3 words that we have been hearing very often: epidemic, endemic, and pandemic. Epidemic. Imagine we are talking about an infection within a certain specified area. The infection and its implication might be dangerous, might be very bad, but we are restricted to the geographical area. A classic example is that of cholera. Now, Indians would know this very well because this had been in the past a very, very destructive form of an infection. But then again, it unless you really physically migrated from one particular region to the other one, it was largely limited to the origin or the place around its origin. The next bit was endemic. That's like one step up, and this is what you see from the color coding that I have used. A fast-growing local epidemic. 60% of the European population died out of Black Death. This was some time ago, but the Europeans would know very much about that. So this is a very bad form of infection that is now like pandemic. Now this is the worst form. So an epidemic with a passport is the popular way of describing it. P stands basically for a passport. So an epidemic that does not abide any geographical boundary. Now, to understand the fundamental difference, you see, epidemic is something where you had the description of a particular locality. Endemic is something where you had a propagation along a certain track. In the case of a Black Death, the propagation happened along the Silk Route. For pandemic, it is not following any particular path. It is sort of homogeneously and isotronically moving across all continents and subcontinents. Its impact is first. So I'll come back to this video in a second, but before we do, let's just have a look at how the COVID-19 molecule looks like. I have taken the liberty of picking and choosing materials from the internet and some from the COVID-19 official website. So the virus, it looks like a tennis ball with a few spikes in its outer layer. So the tennis ball, if you cut open the tennis ball, you see a tangled greenish mesh inside. That is the RNA, the ribonucleic acid, the principal culprit behind its propagation. So if the RNA basically manages to enter your body, then that's when the infection actually starts. And the outer layer is the lipid membrane. And the spikes are very interesting things. These are called the spike proteins. The spike protein, for a physicist, it is much like an indicator, a threshold level, a threshold measure that tells you that you have got an infection or you haven't got an infection, and if you have got an infection, at what level it is at. Now, just to give you an insight into why spike proteins are so very important in this particular context, and why, and this is a very dark news that I'm sharing, I personally don't think that there's any vaccine in the horizon in the immediate future, not in India, not in any country, notwithstanding the claims and the counterclaims. It's simply because this COVID-19, who declared number of traits, that means the number of different forms of COVID-19 are more than 100. And in certain other, for example, in Houston, in Johns Hopkins, the claim is more than 300, whichever one you like to believe. So that means this particular disease comes before you with 100 to 300 different phases. Now, if you have your mechanism of identifying one particular phase, that mechanism is your antibody, that can identify your phase 1, but then it is lost for the other 99 or 299 phases. So that means it cannot form the chemical bond, or cannot basically catch up with that particular pathogen, and hence it is extremely difficult. So the spike protein here plays a hide and seek game, and that's why COVID-19, or for that purpose, most viral diseases are extremely difficult to track. It is for the same reason we haven't got a vaccine for Ebola. We have got buffers like remdesivir. We haven't got a vaccine for Ebola. We haven't even got a vaccine for Zika virus 1952. So we should be very cautious in our expectations, and we should not go overboard when we hear people saying that there have been some new magic. Now, the next bit is the size. That's important. Now, compare the COVID-19 size. It's about 0.08 of a micron to 0.14 of a micron. Micron is 10 to the minus 6 meters, as we all know. And compare that against influenza, which is almost like 100 times bigger. Now, what is the implication of that? It's very simple. Imagine that I'm spraying bullets, some small bullets and some heavy footballs. I'm spraying them with the same power. Evidently, the smaller bullets will propagate longer, and the larger footballs will drop short, right? This is exactly what is happening when we are sneezing or when we are coughing. So what happens is COVID-19 literally, physically can propagate through a much longer distance than the influenza, and hence all those rules about 1 meter and 2 meters. If you ask me very honestly, is there a justification in basically keeping 2 individuals at least at a distance of 2 meters? Why is it 2, not 1.5, not 3, not 2.5? There is no clear quantitative answer to that, but 2 is sort of taken as a rough, safe distance. It's a very simple fluid mechanical calculation that you can do, and you will find that 2 meter is roughly when it basically dissipates most of its energy, so it would fall a bit short than that. So that's why it's safe. All of these from the COVID data portal, and the later analysis that we will show is largely due to the Johns Hopkins data repository, but that is not the only repository that we have accessed. We've used others. So I am sharing with you a video. So this is the video that the European Center for Disease Prevention and Control has come up with, and that video gives you a few signatures of how the disease started. I do not intend to implicate any particular country or race. All that I'm trying to portray here is certain symptoms and certain ways that the disease got started out with. Coughs, the scans, clearly reveal patches in the lungs. Please note, I'll come to that in a few seconds. Breathlessness, asymptomatic propagation. People are being scanned to try and find traces of the disease. So people are trying to find the trace, one of those 300 that I have just mentioned. And this is sort of the suggested defense. Hand washing, typically 20 seconds. Sanitizing with alcohol 70% and above by at least 5 to 6 seconds. I will come back to these numbers in the course of time. And this is green notification. It is helping you a little bit, but it is not taming the disease. And typically the gestation period is 14 days. So I'll stop this video right here, and we will go on to the next slide from this. I've just shown you in the video certain symptoms: high fever, cough, breathlessness. Problem is, all of these also happen for simple flu. So do we have a simple flu? Well, that is a good strong check, but then you come to the gestation period. So if you still have all those symptoms, and probably even exacerbated versions of those, beyond the first 10 days, typically 2 weeks, then you very likely have got an infection of a very bad form. That may be COVID, which is more likely in the present situation, maybe something else, but it is very unlikely to be a normal flu. Now, what are the more technical detection mechanisms? What is it that we actually see? ARDS. It's an abbreviation standing for Acute Respiratory Distress Syndrome. So very bad form of breathlessness. That then moves on to what we call progressive hypoxia. Hypoxia means lack of oxygen in your blood. Why is oxygen important? I think we know that because oxygen is basically that ingredient that supplies the energy traffic all throughout our body. And eventually, the lack of oxygen leads to multi-organ failure. We'll come just to a little bit more biological detail after this. What have been the suggested therapeutics? Now here, I wanted to share my personal, not just my personal view. These are views supported by a whole range of different publications from Lancet, New England Journal of Medicine, and a whole range of others, BMJ, etc., Nature Science. We have heard patients complaining a lot, initially we all did, that we are not having sufficient number of ventilators. Question is this really needed? The point is, undersaturation, which is of oxygen in blood, is a destructive thing, as I've just mentioned, with the name of hypoxia. But oversaturation of oxygen is extremely dangerous as well. So ventilation is probably very often more harmful than otherwise. Nebulization is probably a lot better because it is controlled oxidation. The next bit is, in emergency situation, if it is possible, if you have access to a hyperbaric chamber at 100% oxygen where it's not being pumped into your system, but you're being surrounded by it, so that the body is allowed to sort of diffuse in, then it is probably a lot better option. And if that is not an option, blood transfusion with normal oxygenated blood that comes up with the sufficient number of hemoglobin, which then connects with the MEMS and converts the, basically carries the oxygen onto the lungs, is what is needed. And I will come back to this in a second. In terms of drugs, 3 candidates have been thrown in the fray. Initially, a huge amount of reaction from the Western world. Hydroxychloroquine was initially suggested in Cuba and India, and with a claimed good bit of success. And later, when it came out to be from the Western world, including in America, America initially supported them, then withdrew, then came back in the frame. UK, along with Europe, they did not like the idea of hydroxychloroquine because there was this conventional psychological buffer. How come an antibacterial drug be good enough for an antiviral mechanism? Well, it's way beyond that, as I will try to show you with some bit of description. Azithromycin, so that's an antibiotic. Corticosteroids, that's another group. So all of them basically connive to inhibit the viral growth and replicate the chemokinetic pathway blocker. Why is this COVID-19 so very dangerous, even compared to its immediate predecessor, the SARS-CoV-1? The 2002 and then later the 2012 candidate. Well, let's see how it actually works. The red blood cells, they contain a certain protein. We all know this. It's called hemoglobin. Now, what we may or may not know, this hemoglobin has 4 MEMS. Now, these HEMs are, as you can see in the right-hand picture, the one that I have just shown you. So this is like a tangled bunch of small dumbbells all connected with each other. And each hem contains or carries with it 1 active iron ion. And that iron ion is a dangerous thing to happen because that might actually cause massive negative havoc in your body. So the iron ion is caged in another chemical, the chemical name is porphyrin, and it can bind with 1 oxygen molecule when it's released. So basically, you are carrying a bag and the bag has 1 iron ion, which should or should not be caged, uncaged, depending on the situation. Now, alveoli are the names of the small lung sacs. So if you think of your lungs, the lung is lined with a lot of small sacs. The sacs can actually expand and contract because there is certain fluid inside. When we have a lung situation, that can be due to COVID, that can be due to other reasons, the fluid inside the sac, the alveolus, actually dies, and the alveoli lose their power of expansion and contraction. So then what happens is the elastic property gets lost. If the elastic property gets lost, you have a lung which is basically frozen like, it's petrified like a stone. So the lung doesn't work. If the lung doesn't work, we have a multi-organ failure. So basically the way this COVID works is COVID has a strong glycoprotein. So glycoprotein is the name of a certain type of protein which is carbohydrate activated. So the glycoprotein comes as a shield and it cuts that cage, that porphyrin cage, and sets the iron free. Now iron, when it gets free, it does not do, so it travels to every other part of the body and it does not just come into interaction with the oxygen, the O2. So due to the lack of oxygen bonding, basically COVID-19 effectively eats up the hemoglobin. It's just a popular parlance. It simply goes to say that the iron oxygen bonding is not being formed. If it is not being formed, then what happens is the oxidative iron from the hems hit the epithelial layer in alveoli, which then gets damaged, and eventually it becomes petrified. In more medical parlance, you will call it iron homeostasis. And that leads to the lung damage. Now, I'll show you a picture after this, which will show you the form of lung damage, exactly what the doctor sees in front of them. The body compensates for this lack of oxygen carrying capacity and delivers by having the kidney release or ultra release a certain hormone, erythropoietin, which tries to sort of substitute the lack of the dead alveoli. So it tries to redo the job of the alveoli. It can't, and then your kidney is damaged. So initially, the lung damage sparks the kidney damage, and eventually the body just collapses. Now, hydroxychloroquine, azithromycin, and corticosteroids, they basically work in the following way. So hydroxychloroquine, it stops the glycoprotein, at least partially it stops the glycoprotein from it cutting the iron cage free. So that's it. So it's like a pathway blocker. It's a chemo blocker, and that's how it actually functions. It is exactly the same way it works for malaria, which is what this drug was initially for. Malarial drug was chloroquine. Hydroxychloroquine is, you may call it a more potent version of the conventional chloroquine. Azithromycin does a similar sort of job together with the corticosteroids. I'm not going into those bit of details. Those are partly reserved for part 3 if we get the time for that. So this slide hopefully gives you an idea of what COVID-19 does in the form of a damage. So COVID-19 eats up the hemoglobin, and it basically does not allow oxygen to be doing its job. So oxygen supply is stopped, and hence we die. Now this is, as I just promised, this is from a picture. So this is a publication in European Respiratory Journal. So it's a scanned picture, as you can see. If you look at the patches here, the patches are where these released iron basically has wreaked havoc within the lung structure, epithelial layer. So the epithelial layer is badly damaged. As you can see, these are the damaged patches. And eventually, as I said, I mean, it will initially lead to lung failure and then to kidney failure and multi-organ failure.
Does it mean that someone can be infected with the virus and still not show symptoms at all? And if that is the...
Sorry, I can't hear you. The sound got a bit tangled up. Can you repeat, please?
If anybody has question, please.
Sorry. If there's any question,
we will have a question answer session afterwards.
I'm happy to take an immediate question.
We can take
the structure is not particularly conducive. So if you want to have me take the question, if there's just one question, we can take it immediately. Or shall I move on? You can repeat the question.
I think her connection is not good, so
right. Okay. So
please
just proceed for now. And I should be
one thing we should mention that if anybody want to ask a question, please write in chat box. Okay.
That's a very good suggestion, I think. Excellent suggestion, because then I can actually look at the chat box with some help from Kishore later, and we can take one question in the order that they have been asked. Or back then we can even do a little bit of discussion. So just moving on to the next bit. Now, WHO, the World Health Organization, in its curious stance in this particular case, pandemic and then no pandemic and then eventually a pandemic, hydroxychloroquine bad, then good, and then very good, corticosteroids not so good, and then now probably good. All these quixotic statements, self-conflicting and contradictory statements, now they have coined a new word. They're calling it infodemic. Now, this is one of the parlance that I personally agree with. Now, infodemic actually alludes to a certain description of lots of WhatsApp University, Facebook Research Institute generated statements that there are certain magical cures. If you follow them, you're completely immune. I'll just randomly take a few of them. Lemon or vitamin C. I'm pretty sure that many of you have started out with vitamin C, which you probably or might not have done in your entire life, but suddenly you saw that vitamin C can be a good buffer. Well, it can be a very good buffer. It will not do a magic in the space of a couple of weeks. It will work for you. It's like a protective shield for you if you have been using it for the last couple of years. Not miraculously new. And why so? Let me read out the first sentence. The body regulates the pH. Now, just to remind ourselves of what the pH is all about, pH typically 0 to 7 is for acids. pH 0 is the strongest form of an acid, so like very strong hydrochloric acid, etc. And anything exactly sitting at 7, that's water. 8 to 7 plus going up to 14, that's alkali. So the strongest form of alkali would be hitting the margin 13 and 14, and the strongest forms of acid are sitting at 0 and 1. Just to give you an idea of what we are talking about here. Now, the SARS-CoV-2, the more formal name for COVID-19, has a pH range between 5.5 to 8.5. Now, please note what I have just said here. 5.5 is still within the acidic range, and 8.5 is just inside the alkaline domain. So it's extremely dodgy. See, the problem here is it's neither typically acidic and it's neither typically alkaline, it's somewhere in between, and that's a problem. Because when I start drinking my lemon juice, what does the body do? The body tries to recalibrate the additional intake of vitamin C within its expected range of 7.37 to 7.43. Outside, anything less than anything more is extremely dangerous to the body. There are medical doctors who can give you more details. I would happily give you more details because these are not so very difficult to understand. But let's take it for granted for now that that is the pH range on which the body operates normally, 7.37 to 7.43. Now, suddenly, if you dump yourself a jug of lemon juice, it will spike it, maybe let's say, to something close to 3 or 4. But then again, the body will equilibrate very fast and try to maintain that equilibrium. Okay, so it wouldn't do anything magical. Now, stomach, and this is how the whole thing works, has a pH between this particular range, so typically strongly acidic, and this will try and tame it down. So the proton pump will ensure that the body maintains this pH within the range that I've just mentioned, 7.37 to 7.43. Now, the bicarbonate of soda, is that of any use? Now, that might be a completely different prescription. It's pretty close to the upper end of the pH, is pretty close to the upper end of COVID-19 pH. So effectively, you can, it is not particularly good for you to be drinking the bicarbonates of soda. That will not be particularly helpful. But in terms of killing it, it can. For example, if I purify certain vegetables with soda water, by soda water, I do not mean the cold drinks. By soda water, I simply mean bicarbonate of soda, so cooking soda with a bit of water. So that might be used as a defense. So that will probably work. This is something under study, and that's why I'm carefully using the word probably. But in most of the experiments that have been done with this, it has been seen to tame the virus. Now, having said that, what I'm not suggesting is external green vegetables or other forms of food that you're buying from the market, they have to be purified in that particular way. That is probably sort of auto-purified. One of those typical open questions that we haven't really got an answer for. We have got some statistics. I will show you some statistics, but we do not really know why is it going that way. There are some conjectures, but conjectures are not proofs. How does it propagate? P2P, person to person. So an infected person infects another person. That another person who was not initially infected but is prone to infection, we will call them susceptible in the description henceforth. This is an airborne disease, very likely. So I have given you some journal references here. There are loads of them. Now, mark the word here. Now, if it is seriously airborne, social distancing actually could be useless. Now, this is something very, this is also being counterclaimed. So the claim is from not just from that particular Chinese group. It's a PNAS publication. It's one of the most vaunted publications in biological and mathematical sciences. But at the same, and there are other supporting publications, but there have been counterclaims as well. The social distancing may or may not be useful or may not be useless if it is completely airborne. Given the indications, and I will show you in the next few slides here, that it is at least partially useful, but it might not be completely useful. I mean, the distancing part. So masking is important. The COVID propagates by surface transmission. Now, this is a very new claim. Does it? Well, this particular Lancet publication claims that this is a case of a false negative. Its claim is it doesn't. Now, given the recent precedents of publications coming out of Lancet and NEJM, we should be rather careful about what to take and what not to. Now, here are some statistics that I was alluding to just a few minutes ago. This virus is known to stay safely between 4 to 13 hours in different forms of metals. I'm talking about coppers to steel. Glass, somewhere in between a couple of hours. Cardboard, almost a day. Plastic, couple of days. Clothes, 16 hours. Now, these are all alarming statistics. They would say, my God, I will just die to anything that I touch or anything that I wear. Well, not really. There's something called a half-life and a quarter life. So basically, the ones that I have written down here, 24 hours, 2 to 3 days, 4 to 13 hours, they're talking about the entire lifespan. But the half-life and the quarter lives are much, much, much shorter than those. So basically, with all of those, you are absolutely fine. Now, people did some sort of similar experiments. Now, similar has to be taken with a pinch of salt. They studied some lab aerosols, and this particular statement actually connects to the airborne propagation as well. They studied how the lab aerosols could be spread and how far they actually travel. Problem is, the lab aerosols that were devised were not exactly in the same order of magnitude, size-wise, as that of COVID-19, which as I have shown and discussed, it's typically 0.08 to 0.14 micron in size. Now, these were much larger than that. So basically, these were much smaller than that. So these naturally traveled a much longer distance than what the COVID-19 in reality does. So the first statement about social distancing being useless, that might be a tall claim, which is not exactly driven by description. But research is ongoing on this particular one. What is definitely true is it is partially airborne. As of surface transmission, it is almost definitely not true. What have we been told by the doctors and all by the medical advice? Wash your hands 20 seconds or use sanitizer, a very strong alcohol, isopropyl alcohol, for about 5 to 6 seconds. The alcohol strength being somewhere in between 70 to 90%. Why so? Okay, allow me just to go back to that picture that I showed you a few seconds ago here. So what I'm trying to show you or lead you back onto is the picture that we initially saw in this connection here. So that's the part. Let's have a look at that. Here is my tennis ball, which is the lipid membrane, within which cages the RNA, the ribonucleic acid inside. And the outer coatings are all these spiky things that manage to work like a needle and poke the RNA inside our body. That's the job of these spike proteins. Now, what the, and I have told you that it is basically 5.5 to 8.5 pH in strength. Now, what your strong soap really does for you is it basically breaks this lipid layer. It literally breaks the lipid layer, opens up the RNA, and damages it. If the RNA is damaged, it is deactivated. So that's how it actually works. And the time frames are literally indicative of the strength of the alkaline or the isopropyl alcohol strength that will do this damage. So yes, it definitely works. And yes, it is a very good form of a stopgap defense. It will not last you forever, but it will work for a certain length of time, and you will need to repeat that time and again. Asymptomatic carriers. And this is another branch of our mathematical analysis. What is the importance and impact of the asymptomatic carriers? Is it really true that carriers, typical example would be people with high immunity in themselves who are carrying the disease. They are not themselves infected by it, but they're just like a non-infected carrier of the disease and thereby transmitting it everywhere. You can't protect yourself from that, literally, if that's true. But what is the probabilistic number of people being asymptomatic carriers? That is something that we can ask. And this is something that we are actually trying and probing, not just us, certain other groups as well. The answer is a question at the moment. I haven't got an answer for that. Is infection a key subject? Absolutely not. Now, this is what I wanted to say at the start by using the word mortality ratio. Mortality ratio, recall, is the ratio of the number of dead to the number of infected. So how many people are dying from the number of total infected people? So basically, that is the important thing, not the absolute value of the number of people getting infected. If at all, it is very good for you, as I will come to later, in the form of the herd immunity development. The vitamin C protection, I have described this and that we have talked about that. The virus dies in tropical one, complete rubbish. It does not. India is a classic example. High altitude countries are safe. Absolutely not. Sweden, take that example. And the therapeutics, we have touched a little bit on that. We can go into the details, but basically, hydroxychloroquine, remdesivir, the range of corticosteroids, there have been two very vaunted groups from the vaccine group, the Oxford group, Sarah Gilbert, and the drug repurposing group. So there's this, I think it's called anti-Bibu. They are from Cambridge University. So these two groups have come up with a whole range of options for, and they've zoomed down, they've studied 60,000 possible drug candidates, and they have zoomed down on 6 possible candidates, some probable and some improbable probably. Hydroxychloroquine and remdesivir rank very high in the list of the 6. That's where we should stop, because I can't say anything much more than that. Now I come to that oxymoron that we started out with. What is the model? And why should somebody, anybody, bother with a mathematician or a physicist making certain studies related to biology? Well, let's see what are the key questions here. The first one, I think I have answered this, or at least tried to. Shall we primarily bother about the rate of infection or about the mortality to the infection rate? So shall we really bother about how many people are getting infected, or really how many people are dying out of this infection? The answer is the latter. Are healthy people equally prone to a COVID attack as the comorbids? That's a more medical term. Comorbids means people with predisposed health issues. So for example, a person is already suffering from heart ailment, kidney, lung disease, etc., etc. And the origin could be completely non-COVID related. So these sort of people are called the comorbids. So are the healthy people having the same sort of an infection probability as those people? As we now know, no, the answer is not. The comorbids are predominantly comorbids, and the elderly are predominantly predisposed to this disease. So the infection rates are very different. Have we got the infection rates? No. Do we have an idea about the range, the window of the infection rates? Yes, we do, and I will show you later. Can I predict the number of dead and infected by statistically analyzing past data? Well, I have written, well, what data? I'm not talking about the country data, and I'm not talking about the legitimacy of the data obtained. So there are countries, certain countries that have been accused of suppressing data, etc., etc. This is not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about, shall we study the number of infected, the number of dead, the number of recovered, the number of susceptibles, the number of healthy susceptibles, etc., etc. What do I mean by data? The answer is all of them. That's a safe answer, and that's the only answer. Is lockdown of any use? And I will show you comparative statistics of putting on hypothetical different lockdown dates and how the numbers would have changed. I will come back to that when we go into the details in part 2. Shall we rethink the conclusions based on the definition of a conventional reproduction number? What is a reproduction number? Well, literally it means how many new infected persons are being generated from one single infected. So that's rather the average number of that over the entire time span. That's called a reproduction number. So how many new infected people are being reproduced from the first infected person? Are densely populated countries more suspect? Now, this is a wonderfully optimized balance, as we will try to rethink and clarify again. So you see, we have a list of 6 questions. All of them, in varying ranges, are quantitative answers. This is where statistical or mathematical modeling comes in the fray. This is an area where a simple biological answer or medical answer is not sufficient, it's not enough, and it's often very incompatible. So we need to have this happy marriage between biology, medical science with statistical modeling to take our next step. Now here I have got a cartoon diagram explaining to you what I mean by herd immunity. So look at the person smiling at the center. So this guy is sort of circumnavigated by many layers of people, each of which are protected. Okay, so I'm just reading out, and I have taken the liberty of writing reminding ourselves of a very famous description from one of Indian epics, Mahabharata, the Chakrabuhu. Suppose an unprotected agent, the smiling person, sitting at the center of a series of M concentric circles, each protected by R equally spaced armed soldiers. These armed soldiers are the guys who have been previously infected and have now recovered. What is the probability that an invading army comprising N soldiers, so N number of COVID-19, will be able to penetrate all these M layers of protection to get the central agent? The answer is, and this is a very simple standard probability problem that we sort of study in our higher secondary in our A levels. The the filtered number starting from N reaching the center person would be very low, insignificantly low really. So this is essentially the sense or essence of herd immunity. So herd immunity means if a person without a protection is being surrounded by people with protection, the person sitting at the center is protected. That's the entire essence. Question is, how will that circumnavigation happen, especially in connection with COVID-19 that is known not to have a vaccine, not even a proper therapeutic dosage. So we do not have a drug, medicine, we do not have a vaccine. So where is this extra ring of protection supposed to be coming from? So this is something that will be the start point of our initial model. So the population biology model, S will stand for susceptible, that means people who can be infected. I for the people who are already infected, and R the people who are recovered. Okay, so let's try and quickly make sense of this mathematical outlier. I promise to the non-mathematicians and to the non-physicists that this will not need any serious mathematical involvement. This is basically common sense logic. A mixed population, you have some people who are prone to the infection, maybe because of age, maybe because of their personal immunity levels, etc. Some people who are already infected, and some people who have actually recovered from the infection. Now, what we are saying here is, as infection increases, the number of susceptible will decrease. I think this is common sense. In a population, if the one thing goes up, the other has to go down because the population number is conserved. So each infected agent creates beta, which is the fraction of the number of people getting infected, times S new infected agents. Okay. So each infected agent is creating that many infected agents out of the initially susceptible group. AI equal to number of agents recovering every day. Okay. Now infected every day would mean numbers converted from the susceptible, that means now moving from susceptible to infected, minus the numbers recovered. So the number of people who have been infected minus the number of recovered is basically the number lost from the susceptible regime to the number gained in the recovered regime is equal to the number in the infected regime. So if you just put these two in connection, you get the basic mathematical model. This is called the susceptible infected recovered model, SIR model. So the first equation is telling you how fast the number of the susceptible are changing. So number of susceptible will change when a susceptible interacts with the red guy. The red guy is the infected guy. So when a susceptible interacts with the red guy at the rate of beta, the number of susceptible will decrease. So the rate of decrease of the number of susceptible literally means the same rate added to the infected, but a certain fraction of the infected are also recovering. So that's AI, and that is then DRDT, number of recovered, is equal to AI. Okay. So I'm hoping that we are actually happy with this. So in very simple terms, the rate of change of infected, that means the daily rate of infection, is effectively equal to the negative of the number of the rate change of susceptibles and the negative of the recovered rate. Okay, so if you have a look at that, then you can easily solve this particular model. I will show how the solution looks like in the form of a plot, but basically the assumption here is I'm neglecting the birth and immigration control. I'm completely neglecting the possibility of new people being born or new people dying of other causes. I'm assuming a homogeneously mixed population, so I'm not assuming the fact that certain parts of a town, you might have densely populated people with a higher risk of infection as opposed to the other part where people are sparsely populated and hence with a low risk of infection. These are being neglected here. All recovered are immune forever. That's a very strong assumption as well. We are assuming that somebody who recovers is never getting hit by that same disease again. But in spite of its minimalist description, and I've already described this, the total population is conserved, we get a very nice qualitative understanding of how infection kinetics actually works. The blue line that you see is the line for the susceptible. So as you can see, the x-axis is the timeline, the y-axis are the different infection levels. So as time increases, the blue decreases. That means the number of susceptible decrease. When the number of susceptible decrease, where are they going to? Well, they're actually contributing to the number of increase in the infected. That's the red line. And the competition in between the two is what is ensuring that some people do get recovered and the population is sustained. So that is your green line. So the green line is basically a push-pull mechanism between the blue and the red line, and this is the optimal line standing in between. Okay, so this is a very conventional form of an infection kinetic model, and now we go on to the model where we are talking about immunity development. So here we are assuming that there is a mechanism of developing the immunity. So we are assuming there may be a vaccine, there may be certain people who, because of their antibody development, have developed their innate immunity. So let's just look at the cartoon diagram on the other side. So we have everything identical to the previous model. The only difference is we now have got a bunch of vaccinated people who are putting that ring of protection around ourselves. So that is a very strong mechanism that we have here, that the equation balance remains much the same, barring the additional inputs from V. Let's look at how it actually works. I'm starting with the susceptible. See, so small v1, I will rather show you the descriptions because that will make things a lot clearer. This v1 that you see, the arrow entering the susceptible box, v1 refers to the fraction of vaccinated susceptible. So 1 minus v1 is a fraction of non-vaccinated susceptible, and capital B is the birth rate. So the birth rate of people who are not vaccinated. So that's your first contribution. That's a steady contribution coming in the picture in the DSDT model. So this number then sort of infights between some people who are getting infected. That is exactly the previous term, S times I, beta being the infection rate. So some people are leaving the susceptible box, going into the infected box, and that number is beta times SI. Some people are entering the susceptible box from the recovered box, so that number is Q1 R. And some people are also entering the susceptible box from the vaccinated box, that rate is Q2 times R. So you conjoin all of them and you simply get your first equation. Now if I look at the infected box, what is it that I'm seeing? Well, infected box has a population gain from the susceptible box, that's beta times SI, okay? And it has some people who basically recover from the infected box, so that number is small a. So A times I and the number of people who are actually recovering, going back to the recovered box, and P times I is basically the death rate due to other disease than the particular epidemic we are talking about here. So this way, you can develop the entire...
Amit, Mukesh, some Mukesh Chandra is presenting. I request Mukesh Chandra, please don't present.
Oh.
Please proceed.
Okay. Okay, I didn't actually notice it because thank you, Kishore, because I'm on the full screen, so I can't even see the Google Meet description at the moment. So I'm very happy to take questions, whatever you have later, but let's just carry on with the summary because of the constraint that we really have. It would have been much nicer to do this in a real public where we could take live questions. Unfortunately, we have to postpone those questions until the end. So dNdt then is slightly different. The rate of change of population density is now not a conserved number, but if you look at the solution, at large time, the number density again is a conserved quantity. So this is what ensures sanity in the system. So what do we get out of this particular description? Let's see. We get out a few certain interesting description. I will not go into the mathematical details. I just wanted to draw your attention to two things. The first one is called the disease-free equilibrium. This is the result of some mathematical analysis, basically simple linear stability analysis followed by some perturbation. And the other one that I call stationary state 2 is the one which we call the endemic state. So each of them have multiple options. There are real eigenvalues. I'm not going into the mathematical details because these are sort of regulation descriptions. But what I'm trying to repeatedly draw the attention to is from that particular model, SIRV model, I do get a description where we have something like an endemic state arriving out of an initially diseased state. Now, on top of this, I am trying to add something that I think in India we are very familiar with.
Sorry, Amit.
Yes?
Amit, sorry. We can't see your presentation. We can't see your presentation.
Oh, really? Let me go back.
Yes, we can't see.
No, we can see the presentation. You only have to pin the other window. He has two windows. Pin the other window. Look in the participants list and pin the other window. We can see the presentation.
Is it fine now?
It was always fine. It was always fine. They had just had to pin the other window.
Yeah, they have to pin the other window.
Yeah.
I have to admit that I'm not particularly.
Yes.
I'm not particularly.
It's okay.
Familiar with.
It's okay. It's okay.
No,
Google
the
Meet.
presentation did not stop at any moment. It just because the other person started presenting, it just went off. You were always there.
Right. Okay. No, this is the problem with, I mean, the YouTube link would have been infinitely better. It's my fault that they managed.
Hello, you go to the mathematical model.
Yes.
You go to the mathematical model.
I'm going to the mathematical model because I have to come out of the entire. Give me a second. Okay, so now we were in the SIRV model, and now what I was just starting out with is some particular feature that we have seen predominantly happening in India. Actually, it has happened everywhere, but more so in the Indian context. So we have a very practical situation evolving due to the number of migrant people for many different reasons. They could be laborers, they could be, coming from different professions, but basically people from infected regions, just because of livelihood or for any other reason, moving on to the so-called uninfected or at least lesser infected regions. So basically migration. So migration in the form of a diffusion is what we have added onto that particular mix. So these last terms in each of these equations, the terms starting with capital D with the suffix either S, I, R, or V, and then multiplied with the grad square of S, I, R, or V is what we see here. So these terms are supposed to be replicating the impact of the migrant people, and the migrant people, do they really disturb the economic, this epidemic equilibrium? Look at the top picture, the one called A. I will come back to the bottom picture later. Sorry. Yeah. So the top picture, the ones that you see, the A, that actually shows you how the infection is actually spreading. It's like a heat map. So the x-axis is time, and the y-axis is basically the number density of spread. So X stands for infection propagation density. So it's clearly showing that the infection is sort of radiating out very fast from the point from its epicenter. And then what you see in B and C is how the different dynamics, the colors are indicative of the dynamics. So S stands, the blue is S, the yellowish one is recovered, the red is infected, and the greenish one is the vaccination. So when vaccination increases, basically the whole thing gets contained, and otherwise all of them sort of eventually hit an equilibrium. So initially the number of S gets decreased, and then it saturates. Then basically the same thing happens with the number of recovered. When infection rises, recovered decreases, but then both of them saturate. And the impact of all of that is what you see here. Now, what we could do is, just to digress a little bit into technicality, there's something called the Fisher-Kolmogorov model of infection kinetics, which could actually be used to solve the this particular model that I've written analytically in the asymptotic regime. And with that, what you can calculate is the actual velocity of infection propagation. So the new plots that I'm showing you here, the y-axis of both panels are the velocity of infection propagation. And in the first one, plot A, in the bottom panel, V is changing with the density of the infected migrants. So basically, when the number of infected migrants increases, how is the velocity of infection changing? And the next one is how the same thing, how is the infection changing as the conversion rate of infection increases. Now, please note, when you have more infected people migrating from location A to location B, obviously the total number of infected people in location B has already increased. This is what you see in panel B of the bottom stuff. So beta increases when DI increases, and along with it, V increases, and as you can see, the statistics clearly says that migration does increase the rate of infection. And in fact, what we can do here is we can go beyond that. We can actually calculate and put precise numbers. If you give me the number of migrants from a certain area to a certain area, together with the individual statistics before and after, I, using this sort of a modeling, could actually tell you what is the additional level of infection just because of this migration, and not only that, what would be happening in the future. So it's not just what has happened now, how much of that would be impacting the future is what we can say. Now, what is the take-home message from this? So the speed of an epidemic spread, or the pandemic spread, if you like, is given by that particular formula, and not bothering with the formula and focusing on the outcomes of the formula. Speed of infection increases with increasing diffusion. That means when more and more infected migrants move from one area to the other one, infection increases, as I've just mentioned. Speed of infection also increases if, which is common sense, the infection rate increases. This can be due to the additional number from the migration. This can be just because the locality where they're migrating to has suddenly erupted in their infection regime. That can also happen. Speed of infection will increase with increasing saturation level of infection. Now, please have a look at that. If beta C, where beta C is what I have described, if beta C increases, and how can beta C increase? Beta C will increase when SI, the number of the infected susceptibles, will actually increase, then beta C decreases. If beta C decreases, V increases. So again, we see the connecting loop. It's like a feedback architecture where if one of the components is changed, there's a push-pull mechanism operating in the entire structure that changes or destabilizes the entire dynamics in operation. So basically, the take-home stuff from here is increase in the conversion rate from vaccinated to susceptible leads to decreasing V, and this is what we were talking about in connection with the herd immunity. So basically, you could potentially have a ring of protection if you manage to control your beta C, if you manage to increase the value of your beta C, your V decreases. That means your effective infection propagation decreases. So this is, mathematically speaking, how it can be defined, and logistically, just from common sense understanding, it makes a lot of sense that beta C increasing means the number of susceptible decreasing number of susceptible decreasing, and simultaneously the number of A and P increasing. Just again to remind you what these A and P were. So A and P were the quantities that I have got here. So if you look at that, A was the recovery rate from infection and P was the death rate. So when recovery rate increases, and you can put P equal to 0, P is alluding to the death due to non-COVID infection or non-epidemic infection. So if I put P equal to 0, the recovery rate from infection, if it increases, together with the susceptible being increasing, then we have a good case in hand. So that's literally like what I started out with the cartoon diagram defining herd immunity. So basically that would mean you have a ring of protection around yourself, although you yourself are not infected. And how is that actually happening? Because the people around you have developed certain antibody, either through treatment, which in the case of COVID-19 doesn't work, or otherwise through antibody development, which practically is the only form of immunity that we can hope to at the moment. So this is now, so there were certain people who actually worked with me in that, and I have just given you some details for the more research-minded audience. So these are some publications. If you want, you can certainly have a look at that later. So I've worked on this with some PhD students and a collaborator. So now we go on to, we will take the juice from what we have just learned, and I will straight on show you the mathematical model, and then I will go on to the prediction, which would be more interesting. I'll not bore you with a lot of mathematical details here. Stark facts. In terms of sheer numbers, COVID-19 has far outweighed SARS-2, Ebola, Zika, with only HIV ahead in terms of the mortality ratio. And that then becomes the worst declared pandemic in 100 years, because HIV is an ongoing issue, and probably COVID-19 would be as well. What are the characteristics? Very high rate of infection, airborne or non-airborne. Non-airborne would typically mean surface propagated. Extremely high mortality to infection. So that means an extremely high mortality rate for the comorbids, the people with pre-existing conditions. Very high recovery rate of the healthy. So the people without the predisposed medical conditions, they're more than likely to recover. So this is a very good news. What I'm trying to do here is outline all the characteristics, and then I will pit them against the models that we have discussed, and I will show you most of them are not actually tracked in those previous models, which is why we need the new one. Substantial relapse probability. That is a very bad news, but that is unfortunately the true news. That the recovery is not a guarantee for an antibody. If you can still remember the first model that I showed you, the SIR, I was assumed that anybody who has recovered from being infected is never getting infected anymore. Absolutely not true for the case of COVID-19. The lung alveoli deactivation, multi-organ failure due to depleted oxygen supply. I have discussed this. Very high number of elusive spike proteins, that hide and seek game that I was talking about. So there are loads of spike proteins, and they're extremely difficult to track, practically impossible. In short terms, in very simple terms, it means the probability of us having a potent vaccine in the immediate future is very low. Personally, I don't even think that will be happening over the next few years. No vaccine, no therapeutic, that's the stark reality at the moment. Okay, so way out, what is it? Vaccine, drug, or is it herd immunity? My protagonist in this particular game is the last one, especially since the first two seem not to be making much headways at the moment. So now, why can't we see this, use the models that we have just discussed? Well, let's look at what these previous models do not have. The models, I have shown you three models, an SIR model, an SIR-V model, and an SIR-V model with the migration possibility through diffusion. None of these account for the fact that for COVID-19, there's a substantial differential mortality rate between the healthy and the non-healthy. By healthy and non-healthy, I mean people were healthy before the COVID attack and unhealthy before the COVID attack. The model, none of these account for the fact that an infected healthy susceptible is more likely to survive than an infected comorbid susceptible. Just discuss this. The understanding for a non-pandemic is that overall population density is generally conserved. With COVID, absolutely not. So again, to put it in very simple terms, I come from a small town close to Calcutta. It's called Chandanagar. Now, that town has a bit of an antecedent. It used to be one of the 3 French colonies many years ago, and it still has a very strong French connection. In fact, it was like the refuge of the hideouts of the Indian revolutionaries many years ago. The fact is, if I'm even looking at a small town like Chandanagar, and if I just look at the number of people in 2 or 3 different time slots, successive time slots, the number of people who, the total population, there's a substantial reduction in number just because of death. And you could see the news media of late, even today morning, in fact, more people are dying. So basically, it says that the population density is not conserved. And that is something that has to be accounted for in a self-consistent structure. So standard SIR, SEIR, that E stands for exposed. I have not considered this explicitly in any of the models that I showed you. Some people have done, there are lots of studies, but none of them actually account for these 3 factors. And what they're doing is, and I would, with a bit of honest statement, you may like or you may dislike this particular statement, but basically a good bunch of these so-called predictive papers, or the so-called COVID-19 modeling papers, have largely been statistical data extrapolation, nothing else. What am I talking about here? I'm talking about the following. So if you give some data, so X column and Y column data, to a 10-year-old and ask him or her to open Microsoft Excel, right-click, fit the trend line, a 10-year-old can do that. This is not modeling. Why is it not modeling? Because using a certain fit function, that means simply using a high-level polynomial, I can fit any behavior, any functionality in the world. But this will not have the predictive probability. So that means my past data fitted in this perfect manner will not be able to tell me anything about what might be happening in the future. That's not good. This is not the sort of modeling that we are trying to do. And unfortunately, this is by and large what has happened. And a good bulk of the governmental decisions, and please note, I'm not talking about India only, a good bulk of the governmental decisions have been based on such fictitious extrapolated modeling. And hence, we have had to suffer a lot. And by suffer, I mean dying. A cardinal mistake committed by many popular studies. I won't take names. Many of you will be familiar with the names, but most importantly, if you just bother to dig a little bit into Google Scholar, you will find sort of a cartload of such publications making fantastic claims. All you need to do is pick their number, what they have projected, if they have bothered to, for the future, and put it against the real number. You will see that completely discordant. The numbers do not agree. And this is what I'm talking about. I want to make these numbers agree. And how should I do that? Well, the start point would be this. So I will try to fix everything that I said were not there, and the fix will come in the form of this cartoon diagram. Look at H and P. Then together form the initial susceptible S group. What I mean is I have now subdivided my susceptible group that I previously called S into 2 subfractions. H, which represent the healthy population, that means number-wise the bulk population, who have much lower probability of catching the infection, also much faster probability of recovering, as opposed to the other group, the P group, which might be the comorbid, the elderly patients, etc. Number-wise, they're smaller than age, but they're more liable to an infection, and them surviving an infection is much, much lower. So they're more open to mortality statistics. So I have kept them separately. V is that ring of antibody, the herd immunity that is trying to protect that. We do not have that yet. I'm hoping that it would come out of the model. So I keep that as sort of a nascent term that I hope will emerge, and it will not basically evolve into 0 as I look at the dynamics, which is what we will do. R still stands for the recovered, I stands for the number of infected, and D, what did I say? One of the other important traits was just because of the numbers of people dying, the population is not conserved. So we need an independent differential statistics for the number of people who are actually dying. So D stands for the mortality rate or the mortality description. Now I go into the individual categories and you will see the description is superbly simple. Start by looking at the H box and you can make your own conclusion out of that. So if I look at my H box, the H box, we have some contributions from the V box. It has contributions from the R box. It has also negative contribution from the I box. Okay, so the number of healthy people getting infected is H times I multiplied with the beta 1, that is the rate of infection of the healthy population. Q suffix 1H is the number of people who are returning back to the healthy box after recovering. Q2HV is basically the additional number of people who are coming out of the immunity box, the vaccinated box. And the number of people basically leaving the fray is H2V into H, and then gamma H, we can put gamma to 0 if we are not bothering with deaths other than COVID-19. Gamma stands for the death rate for all other deaths which are unrelated to COVID-19. But we need to bear that in mind as well, because we have tremendous situations where lots of deaths are being alluded to or attributed to COVID when they're in reality not. Okay, so I do this for all the different parts of the model. So I have a dynamics for the healthy decrease rate. I have a dynamics for the predisposed decrease rate. By decrease, I mean infected and eventually succumbing to the infection at times. Infected rate, and then I have got the entire statistics laid in front of me, which looks the following. But gamma, as I have already said, is the natural death rate. The delta, which I ascribe to the P group, the predisposed population group, please note, I have been repeatedly saying the predisposed population group has a much higher rate of infection than the H group. That higher rate is the quantity delta. And then everything else remains unchanged. W and zeta respectively indicate the death and recovery due to COVID. Okay, so now I have got a minimalist structure, and if you look carefully and if you number count, you will find that this model, including the initial conditions, they have 17 parameters. Now that is a very, very long number, and you can immediately accuse me by saying you've got a 6-dimensional model, 17 parameters, and you can practically fit anything. No, I can practically fit anything even without having all those parameters in my 6-dimensional model. But I do not want to fit, I want to predict. And how do I actually predict is what we will now go on to. I have, or rather we have, subdivided the entire group of 19 countries. As I mentioned before, I took the data from the Johns Hopkins repository, and the color coding is very carefully structured. Class A refers to those countries, and I will come back to the details. Class A refers to those countries which have ongoing heavy to moderately heavy infection regime. Class B are the ones which are almost recovered. Some almost cross the recovery regime. Class C are the ones which were initially infected and definitely recovered now. So that's green. And Class D are the one with raging infection regime. Now, some of them could be interlocuted. So the first and the last group, the purple and the red groups, some of the members could be sort of transmuted in between. For example, I could shortchange New York State from Class A to Class D, and I could move, for example, France and Portugal to Class A. This is quite subjective opinion-wise, but you get the point. I'm talking about two regimes where the infection is very much ongoing. There's the purple and red, and two regimes where the infection are either dead or otherwise sort of semi-dead, or at least way past their peak. So this is what I mean, and I've chosen a range of different countries to highlight and basically to test the remit and the strength of this particular model. So this model I will be talking about is not just India specific, actually not even. India is one of the many possible countries that I've taken as an example of. it is a very good example to take given the ongoing range that we have, and it is like an acid test of the quality of prediction that we can make. Acid test that is already qualified with all the others, as I will show you shortly. Now, I will show you results, but before that, what is it that we have done? So let me just bounce 2 steps back into the model that I showed you only a little while ago. So this model, what I call the complete or the most updated COVID-19 infection kinetic model. So this model has a unique feature. So this model, what it is actually doing here is, as you could see, this model literally has, I mentioned, 17 parameters, including the initial conditions, and I'm fixing those parameters. Fixing how? I have not deliberately gone into the details of the AI mechanism. The one that we have used here is called Bayesian MCMC. So MCMC stands for Markov Chain Monte Carlo. I will break those words down into very simple to understand descriptions. Let's start with Markov. A Markov description means if I know the event or the numbers of people that's dying at yesterday, I will be able to tell how many people will die today, or at least the number of people dying yesterday serves as the input for my prediction for today. Okay, so it's basically only one time unit apart. That's what a Markov description means. The Monte Carlo will come to at the very end. Bayesian means basically we have a conditional probability description. I think you will agree with me based on the discussions of the past 3 models, especially when I was talking about the infection propagation rate, we found that they're all interconnected. I use the word feedback to define them. So basically, if one increases, the other decreases. It's like a push-pull optimization mechanism. So that, in this particular case, would mean that if you want to tell me something about, let's say, P, the number of predisposed and how they're changing, you need to have information about H, I, R, V, and D. Okay, so that means I cannot say anything about P without having finite statistics about the other 5. And in turn, all the other ones. To know I need to have H, P, R, V, and D. So these are conditional probability statistics. The more mathematically formalized version of that is Bayesian statistics. So that's Bayesian, that's Markov. And when I say Monte Carlo, essentially what's going on here is at every time point, the system is basically made to saturate using the total statistics. Total statistics here means we are taking the total number of infected, and we are also taking the total number of people dying. So this is the data that we are using. So the total statistics. So for every time points, it's being made to saturate. And at that saturation point, we are calculating the value of the parameters. All 17 parameters. These 17 parameters then serve as the input for the next time step, and for all subsequent time steps, they're continuously upgraded. Please note, when I start from the first time point and go up to the very end time point, and by doing this sort of auto-upgradation using my Bayesian MCMC upgradation mechanism, when I reach the last point, almost inevitably in my first set of correction, the last parameter numbers that I see there are not good enough to make predictions for the data that I do not have. That means going into the future. So I need to do that many, many times, and I have to set that to a certain level of optimized convergence. The way we are doing it at the moment is we are actually involving 3 supercomputers in Leeds, which are doing this quite long runs for every time, for every set of new statistics, just to get an idea. In these supercomputers, which are quite powerful supercomputers, for every country statistics, we need something in between 8 to 12 hours runs just to get each plot that I will show you now. So now I come to the results. So first of all, this is a qualitative result, not predictive yet, a qualitative result just to compare with what I showed to you in the past. So you will see H from the past was quite similar to either the black or the blue. Black stands for the healthy population, and the blue stands for the predisposed, pre-existing conditions. Initial decrease, then a flattened saturation. You have I that is initially increasing and then gets controlled. You have recovered, that basically steadily increases and then finally saturates. And this happens because you have a certain vaccinated population where vaccination is initially very strong, and then it sort of saturates out, meaning most of the people fall within the ring of protection. So if you look at the dynamics, the push-pull mechanism is still very much there. You have HP fighting against I to generate a steady R and V, and when R and V become stabilized, your D is stabilized. So death initially increases, that's a strong line that is growing up, and then it stabilizes. So this is the qualitative description based on data training, as you can see, from 10th of February to the 29th of June. So these are all data trends from this huge time length, and I will go into the prediction when I show you the results. Let's first start here. The 0 for all the plots, every subsequent plots that I show you on the time axis, that means the x-axis, is 22nd of January. Okay, so if you start counting from the 22nd of January, and if you look at the two regimes that each of these plots, so let me clarify first what the color coding in each of these plots mean, because they will remain uniform all throughout. The blue region is basically the region where we have data trained. Okay, so in this left panel, UK, between approximately 50 to about, I should say, like 160-ish, you have the blue regime. The blue regime is where the data training was done. So in some sense, you can call it probabilistic fitting. And then we stopped the parameter values at that particular time point, let's say 160-ish, and used those parameter values for all subsequent predictions going forward. So between 160 to maybe it's 180 or something, you have the yellow patch. The yellow patch is the predictive patch, as you can see. So the training is blue, the prediction is yellow, and as you could see, they match almost bang on with real data. This is the UK statistics, and I will come to all the different statistics one by one. So the outsets of these plots are showing the cumulative numbers. So cumulative numbers means on the left I have infection, and on the right panel I consistently will have the death statistics, the mortality statistics. So for either, in cumulative would simply mean the number yesterday plus the number today plus the number the day after tomorrow, etc., etc. All these. And the insets, they are the daily pictures. So the inset of the left panel is indicative of the daily infected in UK. As you can see, UK is way past its peak point, and it's literally in the remission mode at the moment. It applies both for infection as also for mortality. Now, I must add a very important point here, as we will see being reflected later. In our evaluation, we put a lot more emphasis. That means, mathematically speaking, we put a much higher weight factor in the Bayesian MCMC kernel on the mortality statistics compared to the infection statistics. And why is that? This actually goes back to what is it that we are really after. We want to make sure that we get the number of dead right, not necessarily the number of infected, which would be like a bonus, which is an ongoing work that we are doing at the moment. This work is actually being submitted. I unfortunately could not give you, which I initially promised to Kishore, that I will upload it on archives. I couldn't, because certain journals actually do not allow archive upload, and they will not accept after the submission. I mean, certain really top journals, which is what we have gone for. So the point here is the prediction is really good. And now we are going beyond. Our prediction focus will be entirely on mortality, not necessarily on infection. But as you can still see, infection is still very good in terms of prediction. So 0 is 22nd of January, MCMC training I have given you the dates for. And now let's proceed with the other different countries. The color codings are very indicative. The light green refers to the countries which are sort of in the remission mode. So I have chosen representative countries from all these 4 subgroups. My representative country for the ongoing population is UK. For the remission mode is Germany. For the cured group of countries, I have taken Italy for no particular reason. And for the ongoing statistics, ongoing raging bad statistics, I have chosen India, that I will show separately in a different panel. So I'm focusing on groups A, B, C. India is group D. So again, the qualitative description remains exactly the same. You won't see anything out of that qualitative description, which is what most of these models have relied on. Most of the papers that we have come across, me or for that purpose probably you as well, all these numbers have just been rescaled by scaling parameters, which amount to nothing because they're not predictive. In some sense, you can even claim parts of them could be cheating, but I'm not going into that particular very strong claim. It's a suggestion. So Germany comparison, again, bang on. The same structure holds. The left panel is the infected, the right panel is the mortality, that is death. And the outset is always cumulative, the inset is always the daily statistics. So we are literally able to track the statistics day by day and just look at the level of match. Please note, I'm repeatedly and hammering the words match because this is predictive match. The blue patch on either side of the diagrams, either sides of the panels, they are the data training. So they're really, if you like, conventional extrapolation, conventional matching. But based on that AI prediction model that I have been talking about, we have been able to predict the forward days almost accurately. And those forward statistics are represented by the yellow patches. So we go on, we just keep going forward. This is class C, same sort of a dynamics, same sort of a structure, same range of training. And now we have Italy for the comparison. Again, you see almost a perfect, well, with Italy, it's an exact and a perfect match. Why so? Because Italian statistics is now completely available. I will show you real numbers later, and that will probably give more credence to my claims. So what is the take-home message from these three plots? Well, the take-home message from these three panels of these three plots is our statistics is good and the prediction is probably even better. So now that R0, I'm comparing these three countries here, UK, Germany, and Italy. R0 I have mentioned, but I will repeat. R0 stands for reproduction number. 3 different definitions of reproduction number and 3 different modes of calculations could be used. I'm not going into those technical details. We have actually sampled and tested for each of those different descriptions, and the results are very converging, so there's nothing to be worried about. In simple understanding terms, what it means is that a reproduction number essentially alludes to the average number of infected people coming out of the first infected person. So how many persons are getting infected by my first person, then the second, and then so on. And R0, anything above 1, typically it's about 1.06 is the given suggestion by WHO. So anything above 1.06 is taken as an epidemic. As you go further higher up, epidemic becomes endemic, and very high up the ladder, it becomes a pandemic. Just look at the numbers for example, UK, Germany, and Italy. So for the first 50 days, 0 to 50, you will clearly see that between 0 to 50, the R0 was almost destructive at 5 approximately. Then it sharply reduced within the first few days, but still it held a saturation value between, I would say, like day number maybe 5 or 6 up to about 50, the plateau region. And after 50, it sort of started falling down progressively, and then eventually it became a lot better. So this is the statistics. It is not a foolproof statistics, but it is an indicative statistics telling you how fast the infection regimen is propagating. Please note there is a difference between the propagation of the infection regime and how the infection itself within the population is spreading. Because the infection regimen propagating means it's spreading like a wave, and the wave that hits the first locality and goes past it, that has already done the damage. So within that locality, the infection spread takes a completely different independent time statistics that I will show you separately. This is the statistics that I was showing you in the previous plots. Now I have chosen a few randomly chosen different countries just to give you an idea that the matching that I was talking about and the prediction are not just true of these particular countries, and I've very specifically chosen countries with very different geomorphological descriptions. Netherlands is a country which is below the sea level, as we all know. So that is a very different geographical structure compared to the other countries that we have considered. Prediction quality remains very accurate still. And the range of training and everything remains roughly the same. I have, my apologies, I have a slight different for Holland. The training here was between 10th February, start date was the same. 10th June is where we stop here. The reason we chose to stop at 10th June, did not bother to go up to 29th June, is simply because it is already in the remission and the prediction is already pretty good. You really need to go further up the training ladder if you are unsure about the quality of prediction. And this is just a little bit older, so we stopped at 10 June, and here we wanted to see how good a prediction we are actually making. Now, for that particular purpose, I invite you to have a look at the inset of the right panel, the death panel, on the daily statistics side. Look at the bell-shaped plot, and you will see the yellow region, which is the predictive region, is again bang on. So these are differentially chosen regions. So Netherlands was the country with low population numbers, moderate population numbers, below the sea level. New York State was a country. New York State was a country with a very high population, not a country, a region with a very high population density, deliberately chosen because America had very different infection regimes. For example, the one in Texas and the one in that particular region is New York is very different. So we have deliberately chosen them differently. Now we look at a Scandinavian country, sparse population, very high altitude, and very especially no lockdown, with the hope that they will automatically get a ring of immunity simply based on herd immunity. Well, they put the money a bit too much on that particular herd immunity aspect. And here you see the predictions are going topsy-turvy. The predictions are not as good as in the previous cases, simply because just due to lack of any protection, the numbers are raging like wildfire. And it is very, very difficult for a predictive model now to predict what's happening there and what would be happening there. So Sweden is sort of an exception. It is very difficult to predict because you do not have the same outliers as in the previous cases. South Korea, that's what I mean by Korea. Again, a decent case of prediction and a decent case of prediction both for infection as also for the mortality. Russia, nothing especially good or nothing especially bad. It's still the same level of comparison, very good. And we are looking at real numbers when we look at the numbers. Australia, a different part of the world. And please note that some of these countries suffered from late lockdown starts. Apart from Sweden, all countries have had their lockdowns, but some of them had late lockdowns. UK is a very good example of that. Spain, where it's almost contained now. And this is Hubei, the Chinese country where it all got started. I mean, the Chinese region where things got started in the first place. And I have here a sort of a comparison between Hubei and India. I will come back to the Indian statistics just a bit later, but this is just a prelude of what's to come here in terms of the Indian comparison. Look at the spiking numbers. I will come back to this in a second. Now here, I want to give you a comparative picture. The model is actually capable of predicting what might have happened if we had, for example, compared to the given lockdown date, an earlier lockdown or a later lockdown. Just to remind you, the official UK lockdown withdrawal date was 4th of July this month. So I did not know it. So at the time we were doing it, we preempted like 1st of July. So we took the 1st of each month as our predictive dates, not that far from the 1st of July. Look at the comparison. The left plot, and this is the infection comparison. So the left plot is what might have happened if 1st of May was chosen as the lockdown withdrawal date. The middle plot, the middle panel, suggests what might have happened if the 1st of June was chosen instead. And the last one is what might have happened if the 1st of July was chosen instead. Now, if you just compare, especially the one from the left with the one from the right, you will see that a lot more people would have died if the lockdown was withdrawn on the 1st of May compared to what is happening in the 1st of July. So it clearly tells, if you just compare the two plots, look at the red plots, red lines in the two plots, and you can clearly see both from the trained part of the data, that's the blue part, and the yellow part, which is the predictive part, there will be a lot more in terms of infected here. And I will show you the similar statistics now for the date, again for UK. So this is the UK mortality picture. So this is the 1st of May. What might have happened if lockdown was withdrawn on the 1st of May? Look at the second huge peak on and around the 120 mark. So you will see a huge second spike would have immediately followed. A lot more people would have died. Well, that spike is substantially lowered. If instead of 1st of May, it was 1st of June. The green line, the dotted green line in between is basically the suggested lockdown date, just for the comparison bit. And then we have the 1st of July, and you see, we are fine now. And indeed, we are fine now. I'll show you real numbers later. But clearly, statistics, prediction, and preemption, they all agree with each other. Now, instead of the UK, I am taking a separate case of the lockdown impacts on Iran, another country which is suffering a lot. So this is another randomly chosen country. I will focus on the dead. As I said, that is my main focus. So that means the lower two panels. Daily infected in terms of the infected dead and the daily deaths. So that's the last right panel. As most of you would have seen and known that Iran has seen a huge late surge in second relapse in infection. Now, please compare the bottom two panels. You will see that while the infection rate is very high and the prediction that yellow regime is almost perfect with reality, the reported statistics of death seems to be far inferior. That means the reported number of deaths is far lower than what our model predicts. We have a certain case of misrepresentation of data. This is what our prediction tells me. You can challenge me on that. You can say, how do you know? It's very likely a case of your model failing to predict. I'm basing my observation on the fact that if my model practically manages to calculate all European and American countries almost perfectly, including Australia and other countries, it's unlikely that countries which have had issues regarding media suppression and media details will be the ones which are processing the right details. So this, according to me, is an example where official statistics and reality do not match with each other. Unfortunately, we will see something very similar with India again. So this is for France, and as you can see, the comparison is fair, the prediction is good, and both for infection as also for the daily infected, the blue region, the taming region, and then later the actual lockdown withdrawal date, there has been a very low second relapse. And in fact, with France, interestingly, I'm talking from the bottom two panels. Interestingly, the relapse number for the infection, which is the highest peak is at about infection 5,000, second relapse. The highest peak for the number of dead for infection is 600. Now that's a substantially high number, but still within the perfectly agreeable tolerance limit, and these are like one-offs. So again, the predictions are bang on. So now I'm looking at Brazil, another densely populated country with a huge surface area. And here, what we see is suggestive. What we see, and again, I'm focusing more on the bottom two panels, the daily statistics comparing infected against the dead. So the infected is not coming out with a terribly good prediction, as I warned you already, but the death is. The death regime is bang on, spot on, and most unfortunately, they had a very huge late surge, but fortunately, they're past their peak. So Brazil, henceforth, is supposed to be within the strong containment regime. It suffered a lot, but it's now recuperating a lot faster as well. Poland never suffered a lot and recuperated already. So there was a second peak, and this is almost like a magic. We honestly did not expect to have such a clear and precise idea of the second peak emergence, which we are, and consistently so for all the different countries that we have actually considered. So, so this is for Portugal, the same quality of second peak match, both for infection as also for prediction. And I'm repeatedly saying, my focus being on mortality. Infection statistics might not always be the most reliable in terms of the prediction part, because that's not what we are focusing on. We are biasing deliberately the mortality statistics. So these are the so-called R0s. So you will see the reproduction number varying against time. So initially they were very high, and they were above the 1.06 number for a substantial length of time for approximately 2 months for all these different countries, and then they eventually went down to less than 1. That means within the containment regime. And this again recaps exactly what we have seen in the previous plots. I'm showing you plots for the different groups. The previous one was for class A. This is for class B. Then we have class C and D. So the same sort of a statistics. Please see and look that there are substantial differences in the individual natures. If you club Australia, Russia, and Vietnam as sort of similar looking statistics, the South Korean one is interesting because they enforced an extremely strict lockdown regimen, which could be clearly seen to have impacted a lot faster than Australia, Russia, or Vietnam, which apart from Vietnam, Australia and Russia suffered from late lockdowns a lot. So South Korea containment was a lot faster and a lot better, and practically and barely no relapse. So Spain and Hubei. Please note the Hubei statistics. I take it with a pinch of salt, as I mentioned about the Iranian statistics. It is apparently showing a negative initial R0 that is very unlikely to have happened. So this is dodgy. This has nothing to do with our calculation. This is just very likely dodgy statistics. So I won't claim any prediction based on that particular Hubei statistics, but for every other statistics, I will make that claim consistently, sir. And these are certain other countries whose details I have just shown you. So the reproduction number varied with time. It changed a lot. It sharply decreased from an initial a very high point, then a long plateau followed by a decrease, and at times a second plateau that was suggestive of the second peak. So all these countries did suffer from second peaks, and you could see that again from the R0 statistics. In a way, this is sort of a flashback onto what I have seen, looked at from a different prismatic overview. So these are the qualitative simulation results for Hubei. I deliberately kept them as a case of a spurious study, not for any particular claim or disclaim either way. So what is the success story? Well, a lot. Italy prediction versus reality. So far, all I have showed you was real model plots. The plots are good. Plots are, I was claiming, bang on, but that will not tell you everything about the real numbers. Now, please do focus on the column that I call dead. That means the mortality statistics. And I'm repeatedly saying the infected statistics was deliberately made to suffer in terms of prediction, because we want it to be spot on with the dead. This, in a way, is the limitation of the present Bayesian MCMC scheme that we have followed. We have actually started working on a multi-layered Bayesian MCMC scheme that would get both statistics correct, but we have not got that yet. The dead one, the dead statistics, the mortality profile is the one that we are looking at. Look at the quality of prediction. While not 100% accurate, mostly it is spot on. This is for the Italian data. So if the data stands for real data, the model stands for the prediction made from the Bayesian MCMC together with the mathematical model that I have got. This is for Italy. And if you look at the dates actually, all of them are predictions. So please note the result that I'm showing are 100% prediction, and the data training was stopped on the 29th of June. So I'm using data from the 29th of June and I'm predicting for the next effectively 2 weeks. I'll show you Indian prediction for the next, very unfortunately, 4 months with some green reality. Germany, again, extremely good statistics. So barring some rare exceptions like 5th and 6th of July, and I have a very simple explanation why 5th and 6th of July is also the 12th of July. So for 12th, I don't know exactly, but 5th and 6th, there was a delay in the update, which probably impacted the result. So I'm not sure what is happening there. I suspect that the updates were not actually regular, because if you look before and after the 5th and 6th of July, the results are spot on. And now I come to the Indian chapter. So the Indian simulation, the qualitative parts, they're somewhat different, but not largely so. The somewhat difference lies in the fact that here your P group, that means the predisposed group, the a healthy group and the herd immunity protected group, they follow roughly parallel profiles, blue, purple, black, parallel profiles. This is a bit unlike of the previous statistics that we have seen. The rest is very similar. We do see an initial spike in the terms of number of deaths that initially sort of saturates or hopefully would saturate beyond time day number 250, where the day 0 is still the 22nd of January. So you can easily count yourself. 0 stands for 22nd of January, and my prediction is the saturation is happening, well, factually happening after about 275. But I will now show you the real numbers, where you can make your own comparison and draw your own conclusions. As before, the left panels are the cumulative the infected, and the right panels are the deaths. The outsets are always cumulative statistics, and the insets are daily statistics. So left for infected, right for death. My focus again is on the death, where I get the blue part is the data training part, 22nd of January, 10th of February to the 29th of June. Everything beyond that is prediction, and we are getting extremely good prediction again. So this is the R0 for India, the profile of which is indicative that it still subsists consistently higher up until the 150th day. So that's not good. It's indicative, but please do not take that as your prime source of contention that the Indian situation beyond day number 150 will be in containment. As I will show you shortly, it is not that. So infection profile looks like this. This is the cumulative infected. I have separately chosen them out just to highlight the importance of the infection. And then the mortality. And then I'm comparing the Indian lockdown situation. So I have taken 3 artificial situations where the green dotted line is representing a probable lockdown withdrawal date. The left panel is the 31st of July. The middle panel is the 31st of August. The right panel is the 30th of September. And see, I'm actually challenging myself. I am predicting dates that things haven't happened yet, and I'm telling you, in a way, what I expect to happen. So this is like putting a very tall claim on myself, but I'm so very confident about the quality of the model that I actually dare to do that. So if we have a lockdown withdrawal in India on the 31st of July, what I see from my prediction is on and around day number 225, there will be a second peak that will slowly reduce and will be tamed after the 350th death. In terms of real numbers, I will show you later. I have got a CSV file for the day-by-day prediction going until the end of this year. So this is the first layer. If the withdrawal is in the 31st of July, so there are 2 things that I ask you to make a note of. There's a second relapse on and around the 225th day, and the death statistics then, the daily death statistics then, would hit a peak of about 700. Okay, so this is what I'm seeing from here. The daily death statistics would hit a peak of around 700. As opposed to that, if there was hypothetically a lockdown withdrawal, that means continuous lockdown until the 30th of August and withdrawal on the 31st, the second peak is much reduced, and the peak value, and there's no real peak value, the peak value is about 275, so that's about 1/3 of what we saw from the 31st July's withdrawal. If we went to the 30th September as the withdrawal date, the peak does not dramatically reduce. So the take-home message from this plot is, if it was possible to continue until the 30th of August, we would be a lot safer than what it would happen if the lockdown was withdrawn on the 31st of July. That's the reality. So the same things, but more from the infected statistics. And as I've told you before, the infected statistics is not my key focus, but nevertheless, I'm showing you basically to show that the infected and the mortality profiles here agree very much with each other. So the prediction, again, notwithstanding my own structure of the AI platform, it's still very positive and it's still very clear. So for the same 3 dates, 31st of July, 31st of August, 30th of September, instead of daily statistics, if we then focused on the cumulative statistics, you will see that I'm looking at, for example, 31st of July, the left panel. The black line shows the simulation prediction, and the red line shows what might have happened if, instead of, for example, a phased withdrawal that has already happened in India, if it was possible to continue lockdown until the 31st of July. So this is sort of a comparison that will tell you what might have happened then. So these are numbers, and look at the prediction quality. Now, I have shown you numbers, specific numbers for Germany and for Italy, and for both countries you saw that for the date profile, for the dead number of deaths, data versus the model agreement was almost fantastically good most days. I have taken exactly the same days, that's my column number 1, but columns 4 and 5 are the data versus model for dead, and we look at the consistent underreporting beyond the 2nd of July, starting the 3rd of July. Well, in fact, even before, the data are consistently underreported. So basically, if you look at the infection statistics here, you will see the number of reported infection is actually a lot higher than we are predicting, and notwithstanding that, the number of reported death is a lot lower than our prediction. The only conclusion that I can get out of that is, just like with Iran, this is a serious case of data being suppressed and being underreported. There is no second understanding or alternative that I can think about that. So please note, I'm not suggesting it on a state basis. I'm not talking about any political bias here. It's just a fact and not a political statement that I'm trying to make here. So it's a consistent underreporting of data, and now I will show you more. I'm going beyond that. I'm going beyond. Today is the 15th of July, and I have actually predicted the number of deaths to be at 655. If you look at the actual numbers reported, that is somewhere around the 450 mark, a lot lower than what it should. And 16th of July, so it continues unabated. The entire July going into the 12th of August, we have the number of death prediction more than 500 every day. After the 30th, starting the 13th of August, the number for the first time goes down below 500. It carries on like that all throughout August, September, and for the first time, our prediction model tells me that the first time that we would expect the number of daily dead less than 100 every day is starting the 8th of October. That is the green statistics, and this statistics is based on the 1st of July as the lockdown withdrawal date, which has actually happened even technically speaking a bit earlier than that. So even with that, the statistics are green. So in other words, all sorts of impositions, all sorts of restrictions, travel restrictions and everything, and I don't really know how that is supposed to be sustained. In principle, we would benefit if that was possible to be continued until literally the end of September. That is really what until the first week of October, this is what I am looking at. So if we sort of agree that less than 100 a day in terms of the number of deaths for such a huge country is quite well acceptable, then the infection regime is supposed to continue, including the second peak relapse, until the 7th of October 2020. This is the green reality, and I'm opening myself, as I mentioned, to reality. So going forward, what are we supposed to be expecting from here? We expect a relapse predicted from our model as the second peak. This is not just for India, for all the different countries. Eventual herd immunity, the time scale, well, I have given you a rough range of the time scale. For India, the time scale will be like starting the second week of October. What we have not considered in our model yet, and these are the limitations, so the model can be improved. Age and age groups exposed to the eye groups will have different rates of infection and mortality. So we have not explicitly considered them. The impact of migration, we haven't considered this in this particular model. We need to, and we would, and we should. the impact of phase lockdown versus the secondary relapse. I haven't gone into this at all. Phase lockdown would mean you sort of, there are many different structures, but one of the very standard structures is you do what is called like the containment zones, something like what is being followed in India at the moment. So you choose your zone 1, lock it for a certain time, and then you move that lockdown onto a different zone. This is not, I think, what's being done explicitly, but this is what should have been done if we did a proper phase lockdown. So how would that actually impact in bringing the mortality rate down is something that we need to predict, and we haven't yet. Vaccines and therapeutics research ongoing, and this is the part 3 that I said I potentially could talk about. And before I do, I just wanted to congratulate, thank, and extend my gratitude to the people who have been hugely instrumental in this particular paper, the paper which is communicated, and 2 follow-ups. So Shujit was an IIS, Shujit and Bilisha were IIS students, that's a husband-wife team. Indian Institute of Science students. Sujit is presently doing a postdoc here, and we worked together during his PhD, and the work was on a very different topic, on astrophysics actually. Debojyotida is from the Delhi University, one of my very old acquaintances. I had a brief sojourn at Delhi University when I returned back from the UK. Eva is my PhD student. She has what is called a very prestigious Krebs Research Scholarship, and she's working with me on basically mostly the part that relates to part 3, which is the drug prediction part, and the research publications. The first one's submitted, the one that I actually apologized for because I couldn't actually put that up on the archives. The second one is well, more than halfway through. I've got sort of a part draft of that, and we're working on this. Quite a few more to follow. And just at this point, before I proceed any further, because the next part potentially is part 3, and before I go or do anything with part 3, I just wanted to stop for a second and opinion regarding whether I should actually continue with part 3 or should just stop and start taking questions and sort of interlude part 3 within the questionnaire session. I'm happy to go by whatever option you want me to.
Thank you, Amit. Thank you for your beautiful presentation. And now, please place your questions by unmuting your mic one by one, please.
So as I mentioned,
Amit, you can stop your presentation now. So if you don't need it.
Yeah, part is very much there, but it's.
Please ask your question.
Hello.
Please one.
Hello. May I ask you one question? Hello.
Go ahead,
Yes,
sir.
Yes, I can hear you.
You have considered 17 parameters in the full model.
Yeah.
Is it? Now, my
Yes.
question is how they are, I think, a time-dependent parameter. They are not constants. How you time to time predict
Sorry, the link.
this parameter? Hello.
Can't hear you. Can you just repeat for a second?
You have considered 17 parameters in the full model.
Yeah, I'm hearing you now.
I think these parameters values are time dependent. Is it not?
The link is not really well.
Because time to time the hello, time to time the values of the parameter changes. How you are doing it? Hello.
Amit, can you hear?
Hello. Hello.
I think, dear Dr. Ray, can you please type your question?
Okay. I'm sorry.
Amit, will you take the questions from the chat box and answer?
Perhaps
Amit is not there?
yeah, Amit is there. Amit is there, but I don't know what is happening.
I think he's not connected. Amit is not connected with us.
Let me check.
Dolundi, I can't see him in the list of the people. I think he has got disconnected.
Yes.
We have to wait.
Yes. Kishore, find out.
Amit has been disconnected somehow. He is trying to join.
He is back. He is back already.
No.
I'm back now. Yes. Sorry about
Yes.
that. I don't know what happened.
Yes.
So unfortunately, since I got disconnected, I have lost track of the past questions that were mentioned. I do see the question by Pratap Rai. In the full model, you have considered 17 parameters. I think these parameter values change with time. How you control values? Okay, very, very good question. So I just sort of left some imprints of this answer. I did not go into the details because I did not really want to bore people with a lot of machine learning details. Well, the way it works is this. So you basically take your first random number choices for the 17 parameters, okay? And so you just put absolutely any values because the system is stable enough to make its prediction. You just put any random number values. Then you put ones all through for all the different values, and then you put those values, solve the model numerically. And basically, when I say solve the model, I mean you solve the model mathematically and then run a Monte Carlo around those values, and you look at what is the stable local minimum. So you find out the parameter values for those stable local minima, take those values. This is for your time point 1. So this is your input for your time point 2. So then you just reuse those values for your time point 2 and see how much they have changed. And then you keep doing this for all subsequent time points, and you have to repeat this data training for many, many runs. And what is the caveat here? The caveat is there will be a time after a certain few runs, after which you will find that you have managed to converge to a certain range of parameters that are largely consistent within your tolerance limit for all the time points. So this is like the global set of parameters, which is now then predictive enough. Does that answer your question?
Yes. I think this is like a variable boundary problem, like.
It's a bit more involved. You may think of it like that. What I have not mentioned here is the involvement of the Bayesian MCMC kernel here, because yes, that part is the Monte Carlo part. The Bayesian MCMC kernel, basically, it keeps tracking the statistics for all the 6 different dimensions, and it uses the information explicitly from H, P, and I. So that's the part which goes way beyond a simple boundary value solution.
Thank you very much.
Excuse me, I guess you construct any likelihood function for that?
Yes, we do have the priors. The priors lead us to the posteriors, and obviously the posteriors are time dependent.
Yeah,
yes,
that's
correct.
Likelihood function. Yes, and I have another question actually. I'm Sandeep Mandal from ICMR. So my question is: the data is trained with the daily reported cases and deaths, right?
We have done. Okay, you finish your question first. I will answer later.
Yes. Already have written that. So, but underreporting is everywhere. Means not only for India, all over the world there is underreporting. Even for recent WHO suggestion that per index cases, there are 16 unreported cases.
Yeah.
For January last month, actually last 15 days ago it comes actually. So how do you consider that thing, that underreported deaths or cases? I know that deaths would be much finer than cases, but you have to adjust those things. Is it adjusted in this model? And this is this question one. And second question is, how do you the start date of epidemic infection? You for
the
Indian,
start date of infection. Okay. Yes. You carry on. I will say everything now. Yep. Okay. Yeah, that's fine. Let me answer both questions. I will actually answer the second question first because that's that sort of leads on to the first question. We have the zero, as I have said. We have, if you look at the Johns Hopkins repository, the data there start from the 22nd of January 2020 for all countries. And what we have done, and after checking, that typically for most countries, for the first 15 to 19 days, the number of infection and definitely the number of death is very, very low. So we neglected the first 19 days, and that's why we basically start the training from the 10th of February, where the number of infected and dead has actually crossed a certain threshold. Okay?
Okay.
So we do so that the evaluation is not biased just because of underreporting. Not underreporting in the sense of somebody deliberately underreporting, but due to the lack of sufficient data volume, which you know we need in statistical evaluation. So that's why that part is taken care of. Second, now I'll come to the question, your first question. It is a very good question. Yes, there is a case of underreporting across practically most countries, if not all. The issue, though, is it's the volume. Now, there is a very subtle hidden innuendo here. See, the point here is, when I am looking at the different data for any country for any day, the number of dead and the number of infected, if you remember my second slide, I should give you some representative numbers. So the number of dead divided by the number of infected is actually a very small fraction. So which, by that I mean, so if the number of infected is just reported correctly, but the number of dead slightly gets misreported, just looking at that ratio, you will not see the difference because it's insignificantly low. So this is a strategy that perhaps, and I cannot claim that I know it, but I'm saying that this is a strategy that many countries could potentially have used, just underreporting the cases of dead and not seriously bothering about underreporting the number of infected. In fact, it's much easier to track the number of infected than track the number of dead. Because it is always easy to say that that person died because of non-COVID reason, while the reverse is also true, that a person eventually being detected with a COVID after being dead does not mean that the person actually died out of COVID. So this is sort of a twilight regime, I understand. In the case of India, the problem is its actual solution in a way. See, the point is, notwithstanding the number that we see in terms of infected, in India, the number of dead, if you divide that number by the total population size of the country, or otherwise by the surface landmass, you will find that that number is very, very low compared to practically any other country that I'm aware of. Which simply means that if there is any hidden inconsistency in data reporting, that should just carry through. All I can say is, only for India and for Iran, I have seen a consistent negative case of mortality statistics in terms of real versus our model prediction, something that I did not find in a consistent pattern when I see any other country. That's all I can say. I cannot claim anything beyond that, of course.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Any questions?
And one more question, actually. For India, do you not think that for India is a large country? So I think state-specific prediction in Bayesian, you can use Bayesian algorithm, but state-specific prediction would be much better than the country-wise prediction, because arguably basic reproduction number in a city, in a metropolitan areas, would not be the same as in a village or in some urban areas.
Absolutely, completely agree. If you look at the way we analyze American statistics, see, the point is about availing the data. With America, it is very easy to get zone by zone data. So I can look at, for example, we have done the New York State statistics, we have data for Texas, we have data for the other states that we can easily analyze and do a similar prediction of. With India, the issue is not just with India, even if you look at the United Kingdom. I mean, I am sitting here, I can tell you, because just of local knowledge, which are the zones which are more effective than the other ones. We know this. I can give you an example. So, for example, in the district that we live, it's Midlands, West Midlands. Statistics is Midlands and in London, the statistics is a lot higher than, for example, some of the coastal areas. Okay. Now, if we had data for these individual areas, the data traffic for these individual areas recorded, we would have just used the same scheme and made our predictions. The fact is, we don't. So if you have an access, and I would love to get those data because we have got the tools ready. If you have any ways of feeding me with the data, we can certainly carry on with the analysis, and hopefully with you or whoever is interested involved.
You can get data for Calcutta at least. I have seen those things in government website, in Calcutta website. They have reported data for last 2 months, more than 2 months actually. Every day number, dates as well as cases, you can get it from there.
So sitting today, I can go to that website, for example, and I can get the day-by-day statistics for the past 2 or 3 months.
Yes. Yes.
We can check. Okay, thanks. Then it would be wonderful if you could share that link if you have that.
Yes, I have. I can share you. I can check.
Wonderful.
And also, I can share my mail ID. That would be better. We can correspond in mail also.
Sure. I am giving you my mail ID here, for anybody actually. So if you want to communicate, I have just sent my mail ID in the chat box.
Oh, sure. I got it.
Yes, I got you.
Thank you.
Well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Amit, few questions are in chat box. You can view them also.
Kishore, what happened
was? There is one.
Can you just point me, because when I lost the link, along with that,
a
lot of...
Sir, can you explain the discrepancy in infected population between model and actual number reported?
Yes, okay. Yes, I'm assuming that the question is specifically for India or for Iran, because these are the countries where we have actually found a consistent level of discrepancy between data versus the prediction. Can I explain it? It would go on to the subjective political regime that I was, and I still am trying to avoid. Now, I won't make any political innuendos here, but the fact is, see, even if we are being 100% honest, even if we had an ideal world, where everybody wants to do the best, but it's not just being able to do that simply because of practical constraints. Look at India, look at the size of India. I mean, as I told you, I live in, my hometown is Chandanagar. Chandanagar to Calcutta is just 30 kilometers. Howrah is just 30 kilometers. Even in this 30 kilometers, even today, if a patient falls ill, and I'm not talking about COVID, I'm just talking about any form of other illness. The only practical avenue for having a good ICU is either in Kolani or in Calcutta. Better in Calcutta. So even today, we have that level of infrastructural delinquency, if you like. So the point is, the information migration from the regional parts, that may be rural, that may be a small city, a small town, onto the main database, the data traffic, I think, is not probably properly controlled and centralized. That is probably one of the main reasons, which even if somebody wanted to do the best possible job, they're being impeded because of that constraint. Of course, apart from that, there could be potential cases of deliberate underreporting. This is something that I cannot prove.
Amit, there is a question from Dr. Komalika Hajra. Would you say that a new stricter lockdown would lower the number of days until which the saturation in terms of infection and or death sets in?
Dolandi, can you just repeat it? Because
it is at 5:31 p.m.
13:31. Let me have a look. Sorry, Dolandi, can you just repeat, because your voice broke?
would you say that a new stricter lockdown would lower the number of days until which the saturation in terms of infection and/or death sets in?
Okay, very good question. The blunt, simple answer is yes, it would. And the practical point to that would be there is something that I certainly haven't mentioned at the start of my talk. Apart from my interest in mathematical biology, there's a completely different area that I'm very actively working on. That's econometrics, so poverty inequality. Now, why did I mention this? Because lockdowns do have a huge economic implication. So in an ideal world, if it was possible for the country to go into, just like what I showed you, a lockdown until the 1st of September, we would have been 100%, if not 100%, we would have been a lot safer. Practically, it is impossible. So if it was possible to do that, it would be great. In its absence, what is more physical and probably what should be done is a proper structured phased lockdown, where each phase would be ascribed with a different lockdown withdrawal date. This will certainly stabilize the situation a lot more and bring down the mortality profile a lot.
Yes. And any other questions?
I think somebody wanted to share something. I'm happy to see that. But it's not come up on the screen yet for me.
Yes, can't find any other question, please, from the participant?
Yeah, I can.
Please unmute yourself.
Hello.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay. I have the last questions on age-specific mortality. That is not considered here, right? As
no,
we know here. Okay.
No, we haven't. Again, the practicality of that, the point is, it's very easy to ingrain that within the mathematical model. Not a problem at all. The issue is, where do we get that age-specific data from? Because if you just look at, for example, Johns Hopkins, and this is not the only server that we actually accessed. We did access about 3 more servers. Fact, though, is we do not have exactly age-specific statistics across the different countries. So in certain cases, we might actually be able to get it, and in most of the cases, we wouldn't. For the same reason, we actually would not include the recovery statistics, because most countries, other than the UK and the US, were not actually recording the recovery numbers.
Pragya Chattopadhyay has a question. Pragadi, please unmute yourself and ask the question, please.
Yes. Dr. Chattopadhyay, am I audible?
Yes,
Dr. Chattopadhyay. Dr. Chattopadhyay, we know that about this variant, that is corona. Dolon, am I audible?
Yes, Pragadi.
This variant is genetic material, is a RNA material. Am I correct?
Correct. Absolutely.
So it mutates, having so many types of symptoms that we are practically, we do not know what is the real symptom and what are the, that again it mutates and those symptoms will go off. And we are very much puzzled about it. Will you please explain me how it mutates like this?
Very good question. This is a very good question. In fact, I did say a few words on that in the phase where I was describing how the COVID molecule looks like. And this is the main challenge. And that's why I said that in connection with not just COVID, but most of the virulent virus, you do not really have a vaccine. And I gave the example of Zika virus, which dates back to 52. Then we have Ebola, we have the previous SARS. None of them. We don't have vaccine for any of them because it's very simple. So imagine, and this is the potentially that could have been the third part of my talk, which I'm not going on to. So imagine what I'm just giving you a sort of a quick overview of my understanding of genomics. So when you look at an RNA, so RNA is basically a combination of 4 letters, A, T, C, and G. So if I look at an RNA, basically I see a bunch of some AA, then 3 Ts, then 4 Gs, etc., etc., just randomly ordered. Now, one of the things that we have recently done is basically, and this is not just us, other people have done that. We have done a new one. We have now developed a bunch of algorithms that can actually translate that letter-dependent information to a number-dependent information, because computers can only read numbers. So when you do that conversion, so your sequence, just to give an idea, so let's say you have A, T, and C, and G, and I am calling A as 1, T as 2, C as 3, G as 4. What I have is a bunch of 1, 2, 3, and 4 randomly assorted, correct? Now, mutation effectively refers to the fact that a certain part of that chain, that combination of numbers, have been altered for any reason. In the case of virus, and definitely for COVID-19, which is a very smart virus, what it does is it keeps hiding that particular part of the chain from your view. So that chain effectively moves like a pseudo chain. So you have a long chain here. A small part of that was initially detected as that virulent trace, that stain. And that part then changes over to a different part on day 2 and another part on day 3. So this is the real problem, the real challenge. How do you actually track that part, and which particular antibodies would you be actually accessing, and how your antibody would develop your defense against the antigen? So if I'm looking at more from a biological perspective, we need something like equivalent to an immunological synapse. And an immunological synapse requires the following. It requires a bondage between your T or B cell with the pathogen. And this is not exactly happening because the spike protein is hiding the pathogen. So there is no simple solution, and there is no real direct answer to that. It is tremendously difficult. The only guaranteed detection that can happen is what is called the polymerase detection. And it's equivalent to, like, if you are familiar with this particular wording, heat map. It's like a heat map of your body. It's not your body only, in this case, the heat map of your RNA, and that leaves a trace, a marker. So above that marker, it means you have the COVID infection. Below that marker, you don't. It is a very accurate test, but it's very expensive, which is why we do not have such random predisposed samples. And most of the testing that we talk about, they are just antibody testing, and they just spike, give you false negatives a lot. What we are at the moment trying to do is we are trying to develop a neural network-based model. It's related to one of my old friends that probably he's hearing and probably he's not sure. So we are trying to trace the other chemolocators, and we are trying to see signals from the other chemolocators, and we are trying to sort of collate that information to define a theoretical spike, a threshold that will tell us above which you have the COVID and below which you don't have it. And those tracings can be done from simple blood tests. That's what we are actually working on at the moment.
Thank you. And again, Dr. Jagatbandhu, I'm boring you, I know, but even then, there are so many immunosuppressive diseases. That is cancer, that is during dialysis and everything. Practically this immunity, how can we grow within ourselves this immunity in a very normal way or in a very easy path?
The real problem is, again, a very good question, but the answer is in the negative. See, the point is immunity can be suppressed. You probably remember I have mentioned hydroxychloroquine, I have mentioned corticosteroids, and I have also mentioned the remdesivir. And I did say
steroid, practically there is a very good and bad effect of steroids.
Yes. Corticosteroids, yes. These are basically for the lung pathways.
Corticosteroids, right.
Yeah. So there are 3 other candidates.
Do we use corticosteroids?
No, I'm aware of that. And so the Cambridge group actually came out with 3 more immunosuppressants as possibilities. Now, I had a very strong personal view, and I still have that, about the immunosuppressants, because immunosuppressant, I know what they're talking about. They're basically trying to block the pathway by suppressing your immunity. But just like what you said, that is a very dangerous step to take, because if you do that, people who already have suppressed immunity, they're completely open to absolutely any other form of attack, including the COVID-19. So you might hypothetically be able to quell the COVID-19 attack while exposing yourself to every other possible attack. And that's not particularly a good option. So it is a it is a very, it's that thing is like a catch-22 at the moment. And I suggest, or I suppose, and this is another thing that I'm personally very much involved with. I unfortunately do not know your background. I'm assuming you're a medical doctor, are you?
No, not the least.
Okay.
I'm a PhD. Okay.
Okay. So the reason I said that is because I am supposed to be actively involved with vaccine development in, and there would be an international UK-India forum that I'm leading from the UK side. This would be happening in February 2021. So this would like be the first, I mean, I'm perfectly well aware of the claims made about the vaccines. I'm just not convinced, but we will discuss.
Okay, Dr. Chattopadhyay, we have another question from chat box. Okay, from Shudeep Korai. Why there is a limitation in predicting the infected numbers via this model?
Okay, yeah, it's the way we have implemented the model. So the way we evaluated the model is this: we took the total day by day and then later cumulative statistics, both for the number of infected and the number of dead. And then what we did was, we actually, so imagine that you have two boxes, a red box and a blue box. The red box is your infected box, blue box is your dead box. So the number of infected is a lot larger than the number of dead. Basically, to put them roughly in the same frame, what we did was we deliberately ascribed a prior, a much higher prior. Prior means the prefactor, the weight factor, to the number for the dead. So it's like, let's say you have 80% infected, 20% dead. I'm just putting random numbers. So it's like 4 to 1. So to basically make it like 50-50, what you could do is you multiply 1/4 with the red box and 3/4 with the other box, and that's exactly what we did. So for that particular reason, the prediction is heavily weighted in favor of the mortality statistics. Now, what can we do to get out of this? And this is what we're doing at the moment. We need a multi-layered prediction mechanism. So what we have to do is, we do everything that we have already done, everything that I have described, but first only using the mortality statistics, then using the infection statistics, and then combining them using independent priors from a different distribution. This is another plan for the future. This is an ongoing plan, actually.
Another question, how the lockdown procedure helps to develop the future herd community? Can you explain it?
Yes, it doesn't. It doesn't really. Lockdown only differs the inevitable in a way, but there is also sense in that. Why? So let's take the following. So you have the lockdown, so you're immune. You're not having the infected. You are not getting infected because you're not meeting the infected. Now, at a certain time point, the lockdown gets withdrawn. So then what happens? So then you are interacting with the infected, but at the same time, you're also interacting with the recovered. So basically, that is how the herd immunity will eventually develop and will protect yourself. But otherwise, we will always be open to any form of an infection. But in itself, lockdown does not stop the infection traffic. It just restricts the infection traffic to controlled regimes in the control zones. And once you withdraw the lockdown, that will start surfacing again. So it's just like having a, you have a box, you have a gas balloon, and the gas balloon is enclosed, and you have tied it, so it's not floating. Once you withdraw the lockdown, you have cut the thread and it starts flying everywhere.
Any other question?
Another one from the chat box, I can see. How can we, from Bappa Shaha, how can we incorporate super spreader in the model?
What is a super spreader? I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, is it some sort of a medical device, or did you mean anything else? I'm not entirely sure about it, so I can't really.
Is he there? Yeah, he may only clarify this question. I think he's left.
I think he is not there.
Okay, so I think there is no other questions. So let's thanks once again to our beloved speaker. And now we are almost at the end of this session. I request Professor Promita Howley for her valedictory address. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chattopadhyay, for this amazing presentation. I hope you have all enjoyed the informative assembly. It's my honor and privilege to have been asked to propose a vote of thanks to all those who helped to make this virtual assembly happen. First of all, I would like to thank wholeheartedly to our speaker, Dr. Amit Chattopadhyay, for an enlightening yet lucid presentation of a complex statistical model which gave us a better perspective of containment of this pandemic. Please accept our sincere thanks for being here with us.
Thank you very much.
Also, I wish to express my gratitude to our respected Principal Sir, Dr. Subroto Kumar Rai, for extending his support to our endeavor. I especially wish to thank our organizing secretary of today's webinar, Dr. Kishore Mukhopadhyay, for his endless effort. All the behind-scene technicalities have been managed by him. Over and above, I profess my deepest regard for our participants. We are just overwhelmed to receive responses from everywhere. Should I say, allow me to mention a few? We do have participants from ICMR, IITs, ISERs, IIST. Thank you for your interest. Also from various universities, participants from many colleges from different cities of India, not only from Kolkata but also neighboring districts. Amazing! Wave has brought us all to this event. I would like to pay my warmest regards to all of you dear participants of this virtual assembly. Without your presence, the whole effort would prove useless. I know that the knowledge we have gained and the thoughts we have raised during this webinar will be useful in our continuing effort to keep us safe in this pandemic. I wish you all health and well-being before announcing closure of this event. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you.
Thank you, Amit, once again. So, on behalf of Prabhu Jagatbandhu College, we again thank you for your cooperation and a wonderful talk you have given.